Courtroom 12 smelled of stale coffee and older disappointments. Prosecutors shuffled files. Defense attorneys rehearsed objections. On the witness stand sat Axel, the department star K9, tongue lolling, eyes alert. They'd brought him to demonstrate a lineup procedure, nothing more. Then the side door opened, and in walked a foster child with a stuffed bear frayed at the seams. 6-year-old Lena whispered, "Max," and time hiccuped. Axel's posture melted, his tail thumped, exactly 3 times the secret code her father once taught him for, "I'm safe." Gasps ricocheted off walnut panels as the dog leapt from the stand, trotted past the bailiff, and planted himself at Lena's feet, head bowed like a monk at prayer. The judge's gavel hovered, frozen mid-air. A single question settled over the room. Could a dog's heart overrule sworn testimony? Before anyone found an answer, the courtroom lights flickered, and an old scar on Axel's flank glistened under fluorescent glare, the same scar Lena's father reported the night their home burned down. Suddenly, today's docket felt laughably small, and everyone inside understood. Loyalty had just called the first witness, and the truth would not be excused. The clouds hung low over Edenfall National Cemetery, thick and unmoving, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Rain had fallen earlier that morning, soft but steady, and now a faint mist clung to the grass like grief that refused to lift. Rows of folding chairs lined the path between 2 marble headstones, all facing the flag-draped casket at the center, an island of color in a field of gray. A military bugler stood to the side, silent for now, his trumpet cradled in white-gloved hands. Uniformed officers lined the front row, pressed and solemn, medals catching what little light filtered through the clouds. Behind them sat civilians, friends, and strangers, drawn by duty, curiosity, or love. No one spoke. Even the wind was still. Beside the casket sat a German shepherd, unmoving, alert. Axel. His vest bore the insignia of the local K9 division, but his posture held something more ancient than service. His ears were forward, his eyes fixed on the horizon, and his body, though disciplined, carried an undercurrent of tension, like an arrow pulled taut but never loosed. He did not whimper, he did not shift, but something in him watched. From the edge of the crowd, a small figure emerged, a girl no older than 9 with unbrushed brown hair and shoes too large for her feet. She clutched a faded teddy bear under one arm. Her raincoat was buttoned wrong. She didn't look like she belonged here, yet she walked forward, each step slow, almost unsure, as though her presence was a question and the world hadn't answered yet. She paused near the last row of chairs. Her eyes weren't on the casket, they were on Axel. The dog didn't move. And then, the trumpet began. That single, aching note of taps sliced through the air like a memory returning too fast. People stood. Hats were removed. A few men saluted. Others closed their eyes. And Axel, trained to remain still during honors, shifted his head. The change was small, a tilt, a blink, but for a dog trained in precision, it was seismic. His ears twitched toward the girl. His eyes narrowed. And then, without a sound, he stood. The handler noticed immediately. "Axel, hold," he whispered, hand gripping the leash. "Stay." But Axel did not stay. He stepped forward, then another. The leash slipped through the handler's fingers like water. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Axel, I said stay." The command came firmer now, urgent, even fearful. But the German shepherd kept walking not toward the casket, not toward the officers, but toward the girl with the teddy bear. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just opened her arms. And Axel, this decorated K9 officer with years of service, who'd been deployed into raids and riots, who'd faced down gun barrels and sirens, simply walked into her embrace and placed his head gently against her chest. Silence fell like thunder. The trumpet stopped mid-note. The girl whispered, her voice barely carried by the mist. "I knew it was you." The dog let out a low guttural sound, not a growl, not a bark, but a sound that trembled in the space between longing and recognition. His body trembled, his eyes closed, and when he opened them again, they were soft. Like home. The officers stared, unsure if they were witnessing a breach of protocol or a miracle. Someone in the back row muttered, "That's not just any dog." A woman gasped quietly, "That's Lena Callahan." And in that moment, the pieces began to fall for those who knew how to see. 6 years ago, a fire had stolen a man, a little girl, and a dog from this town. Officer Mark Callahan, whistleblower, father, friend. The body recovered from the flames was charred beyond DNA recognition. The child, found days later in an alleyway, half mute and clutching a teddy bear. The dog, never found. Until now. Axel, if that was even his name, licked the girl's chin. The handler stepped forward, conflicted. "Ma'am, sir, someone stop that dog. He's breaching chain of command. He's on duty." But no one moved. Because there are moments when duty must bow to something deeper, older. The girl knelt, pressing her forehead to the shepherd's. "He found me," she said. And for the first time in years, the bear in her arms slipped to the ground, its threadbare chest stitched with letters. M-A-X. The funeral wasn't just for a fallen officer anymore. It was for a broken timeline, reunited in silence. And everyone felt it. The handler lowered his voice. "We need to get him back in formation." But the senior officer raised a hand, his voice cracked with age. "Let them be." And in the stillness, the truth stood taller than the flagpole. The girl had come not to say goodbye, but to bring someone home. The rain had begun earlier that night, not in sheets, but in that slow, soft way that made the world feel quieter than it really was. The sound of it whispered against the windows, like someone knocking gently but never needing to be let in. In a small one-story house tucked between pine trees and power lines, a single bedroom light was still on. Lena sat upright on her bed, legs crossed beneath her, the old teddy bear in her lap. Its left ear drooped, half torn. A thin line of thread held its neck together like a scar that never quite healed. She ran her fingers along the familiar stitching on its chest. 4 faded letters she had long memorized more by feel than by sight. M-A-X. The name didn't just belong to the bear. It belonged to the memory buried so deep, sometimes even Lena doubted it was real. But not tonight. Tonight, it had come back in full color in the dream. She saw the fire again. Not the flames, but the before. Soft breathing against her neck, warm fur under her hand, a low whimper. Max hadn't barked that night. He never barked unless it mattered. That was what her real father used to say. Max only barks if the world's ending. And maybe it had. Lena blinked up at the ceiling, shadows dancing from the streetlight outside. Her foster mother, Dana, had left the hallway lamp on again. A kindness she never spoke about but always remembered. The door creaked open a moment later. Dana, in her bathrobe, leaned against the frame. "You're still awake?" Lena nodded, arms tightening around the bear. "I had the dream again." Dana stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed. She smelled faintly of lavender and strong coffee the way she always did when she was worried but trying not to show it. "Same one?" Lena hesitated. "This time, I heard his tags." Dana tilted her head. "Whose tags?" "Max's." Lena looked up, eyes dark with something too heavy for a 9-year-old. "He was wearing the collar with a little bone tag. You know, the shiny one. I saw it in the firelight. He was trying to push me under the bed." Dana exhaled slowly. "Lena, honey, that was 6 years ago." "I know. But I always dream it on the same night. Every year." There was silence. The kind that fills a room, not with comfort, but with quiet uncertainty. Lena didn't blink. "He's alive." Dana gave a soft, practiced smile, the kind adults wear when they're trying to step around a child's grief like it's broken glass. "Sweetie, I know you want him to be, but dogs don't usually—" "No," Lena interrupted. Her voice was not loud, not angry, just sure. "He's not just a dog. He knew when I was sad. He'd put his paw on my chest when I had bad dreams. He was my home." Dana looked at the bear again. Her fingers brushed the old stitching. "This was his, huh?" "Number. It was mine. But he slept with it every night when I was sick. Like it was his job." The words hung in the air, delicate and impossible. Dana didn't answer right away. She stood up, paced toward the door, then back again. She glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. "The funeral," Lena said suddenly. The one for the officer who died last week. They said his K9 will be there. Dana raised an eyebrow. How do you know that? I heard it on the news. The reporter said the dog's name is Axel. He's a German shepherd, dark coat. He's got a little nick on his left ear. Dana froze. That wasn't the kind of detail they gave in headlines. Lena's voice softened. I think that's him. You think Axel is Max? No, Lena said, looking down at the bear. I know Axel is Max. Dana opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. She was used to imaginative children. She had fostered 7 before Lena. But this wasn't fantasy. It didn't shimmer with make-believe. It was sharp, specific, quietly urgent. And Lena had never asked to go to a funeral before. You're sure about this? Lena didn't answer. She just pressed her face into the bear and whispered something too soft to hear. Dana watched her for a long moment, then sighed. All right, we'll go. Lena looked up, startled. We will? Dana nodded. But just to observe, okay, from the back. No promises. That's not your dog anymore, Lena. It's the city's dog now. Lena's eyes didn't waver. He'll know me. Dana hesitated, then reached for the hallway light. Go to sleep. We'll leave early. But Lena didn't sleep. Not really. She lay under the covers, arms wrapped tight around the bear, heart pounding with something that wasn't hope, it was older than that, closer to instinct. At one point, around 3:44 a.m., she sat up and whispered into the bear's ear. Max, if you can hear me, please remember, no one else heard it. Not the trees, not the rain, not even Dana, who dreamed restlessly down the hall. But somewhere, miles away in a darkened kennel behind a police station, a dog lifted his head from the cold concrete, ears twitching, and waited. The crowd at Edenval Cemetery didn't know whether to sit, stand, or speak, so they did nothing. Chairs remained half-folded. Hands stayed frozen in salute. The air, already thick from mist and trumpet sorrow, now held something else entirely. Something heavier. The girl hadn't let go of the dog. And the dog, in turn, made it clear he wasn't going anywhere. Axel, or Max, depending on who you asked, lay with his head across the small girl's lap, tail barely moving, eyes closed, but ears alert. His body curved around her as though she were the most natural thing in his world. And in that moment, maybe she was. His handler stood nearby, one gloved hand still holding the empty leash. Jaw clenched, voice low. Axel, he commanded again. Heel! The dog didn't so much as twitch. The handler tried a second tone, lower, sharper, the voice used in training yards and riot drills. Axel, to me, now. Nothing. A third time. Return. No response. Not even a flicker of obedience. Someone near the front row cleared their throat. An older man, uniformed ribbons pinned above his heart, leaned forward slightly and murmured, Is this normal? The handler didn't answer right away. Sweat beaded beneath his collar. He had worked with Axel for over a year now. The dog had tracked suspects through chemical spills, ignored gunfire, even resisted raw meat when ordered to. He had never disobeyed. Until now. I don't understand, the handler admitted, almost under his breath. The girl, Lena, lifted her hand and gently stroked the dog's ear. Not playfully, not like a stranger, but with that old rhythm, the kind you don't learn from books or videos. The kind of rhythm that comes from sleeping beside a heartbeat for years. Axel released a soft exhale, not a sigh. Something deeper. The kind of sound you only make when you've been holding your breath for far too long. The senior officer stepped forward. His name tag read Colburn, a man whose eyes had seen more wars than medals on his chest could explain. He stopped a few feet away from the handler. Permission to approach? Colburn asked. Not of the dog, but the child. Lena looked up, unsure. Dana, standing several paces back, nodded carefully. Colburn crouched low, careful not to tower over them. He studied the dog's frame, noting the tension in its hind legs, the way its breathing changed only slightly at his presence. He reached for a small notebook in his pocket and flipped to a torn, yellowed page. Something photocopied, long ago. German shepherd, male, black sable coat, he murmured. Left shoulder puncture wound from metal debris. Confirmed by emergency vet report dated the 2nd of August, 6 years ago. He leaned a little closer. Do you mind? He asked softly. Lena didn't speak. She simply shifted, allowing him to see the dog's left side. Colburn's eyes narrowed. Beneath the thick fur just behind the shoulder blade, barely visible in the light, a scar. Faint, healed over, but unmistakable. He looked back at the handler. Your Axel ever take shrapnel? The handler blinked. No, sir. Not that I know of. You run a full body scan before certification? Yes, sir. But I wasn't his original handler. He came from another state. They said he was a transfer from a disbanded unit, had military-grade training, high discipline, passed every test. Aye? Colburn nodded, then looked back at the dog. Funny thing about scars, he said, more to himself than anyone. They don't just tell you what happened, they tell you when. Lena's eyes locked onto his. I told you, she whispered. He's Max. Colburn didn't answer. He just reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, brittle at the edges, corners curled from too many years and too many drawers. Fire report, he said. House in Hollow Bend. Man dead. Girl missing. Presumed perished. Caller. Never found. He glanced at the teddy bear in Lena's arms. Until someone showed up this morning carrying that. Lena tightened her grip. Colburn stood slowly. Get the vet. The one who patched up that dog after Hollow Bend. See if she's still practicing. The handler stepped forward, clearly rattled. Sir, I need to take Axel back. Chain of command. Son, Colburn said, not unkindly. That dog just broke federal protocol, ignored every command you gave, and walked into the arms of a girl who hasn't seen him in 6 years. He turned to face the casket, voice suddenly lower. Maybe you don't command him anymore. The wind picked up then, soft, cool, carrying the distant sound of river water just beyond the hills. Axel lifted his head slightly, ears alert, as if hearing something only he could understand. The funeral resumed, but not in the same way. No trumpet, no speeches, just the slow movement of truth, finally pushing through the silence. When the service ended, and the flag was folded and passed, it was not the soldiers' medals people whispered about as they left. It was the girl, the dog, and the way he never once looked back at the man who called him Axel. The night it all began, the house smelled like cinnamon and cedar. Mark Callahan stood in the narrow kitchen of their small cottage just outside Hollow Bend, still in uniform, stirring a pot of oatmeal while his daughter sat cross-legged on the floor, a battered coloring book open in her lap. Her bare toes tapped against the tile with no real rhythm, and the yellow crayon in her hand had long since lost its paper wrapping. Across the room, Max watched with quiet alertness, not the kind born of training, but something older, protective, innate. He lay by the sliding door, head on his paws, but his eyes never left the child. The firelight caught in their reflection. If you looked closely, you might have mistaken it for tenderness. Daddy, Lena said without looking up, Max is watching me color again. Mark smiled, soft lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling. He's making sure you stay inside the lines. I think he's bored. He's working. He's not doing anything. Mark chuckled. That's how good he is. The clock on the wall read 8:47 p.m. Mark's phone buzzed for the third time that hour, screen lighting up with a name he didn't trust anymore. He muted it without answering. Things had shifted in the department over the past few months. Files missing, evidence swapped. He'd quietly flagged a half-dozen inconsistencies in the last case he closed, and he wasn't the only one who noticed. When he told Internal Affairs he thought someone inside was involved, they told him to back off. That's when he knew he was right. He glanced out the window. A black sedan had been parked across the street for 2 days. Always empty. Always there. He stirred the oatmeal again, slower this time. Max rose suddenly, ears twitching. Mark noticed. You hear something? The dog didn't respond. He just moved, not quickly, but with that kind of controlled precision that says, I'm listening to something you can't hear yet. Mark lowered the spoon. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, like burning leaves or a forgotten candle, but it thickened too fast. Not the smoke from the stove, not from wood. This was different. Chemical. Accelerant. Mark moved instinctively. "Lena, come here. Now." The girl stood, confused, the crayon dropping from her fingers. "What's wrong?" "No questions. Arms up." He scooped her into his arms, grabbing his badge and the duffel bag he'd kept by the back door for weeks, ever since the first warning. He reached for the emergency latch behind the pantry shelf, a small, narrow crawl space he'd reinforced when he bought the house. No one knew about it. Not even his partner. Max followed, close. As he pulled the panel open, the first explosion went off somewhere near the living room. The lights flickered. The floor shook. Then came the gunshots. 3. Close. Not random. Not panic. Targeted. Mark ducked into the tunnel. Lena pressed to his chest, Max crowding close behind. The heat was building fast. He shut the panel just before the hallway behind them flashed orange. The passage was barely 4 feet high, lined with concrete and dust. Mark could feel Lena's heart thudding against his chest. Max stayed at her side, pressing close but silent. Mark whispered low into her ear, "You're gonna stay here, with Max, just like hide and seek. Remember?" Lena didn't answer. Her arms clung tighter. He knelt, pulling the duffel bag open and shoving it toward the back of the tunnel. Water, flashlight, granola bars. "You stay here until someone you know comes. Not before, understand?" Her eyes filled, but she nodded. Then he took the bear from the strap of the bag, the one with Max stitched into its chest, and tucked it into her arms. The sounds above were growing wood snapping. More shots. Boots across tile. Mark turned to Max. "Protect her." Max held his gaze. No bark, no movement. Just a silent contract, sealed by years of trust. Mark touched Lena's cheek. "I love you more than anything. I'll come back." He started to close the panel. Lena cried out, "No!" Mark paused. But there wasn't time. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, whispered something only she could hear, and slid the panel shut. The darkness was instant. Warm. Breathing. Lena pressed herself into Max's side. The bear crushed between them. Her father's footsteps faded fast. Then, silence. And finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the world above collapsed. The morning light fell cold and hollow across the ruins of Hollow Bend. Smoke still curled from the blackened skeleton of what once had been a home. Charred beams jutted out like broken ribs, and the front steps led to nothing but ash and the smell of something that never should have burned. The fire trucks had long since pulled away. Yellow tape flapped limply in the wind. The silence didn't feel respectful, it felt suffocating. Detective Marianne Holt stood with one boot heel sunk into damp earth and the other on scorched tile, staring at the debris-stained coroner's bag as it was zipped shut. Inside, a single adult male, badly burned. Dental confirmed it that afternoon. Mark Callahan, officer, father, dead. No other bodies were recovered, not officially. About 30 feet from what was once the back hallway, a second bag had already been cataloged and quietly wheeled away, smaller, lighter. Inside, canine remains. Burnt, partial. The tags had melted, but someone had found fragments of a collar nearby. It was enough to build a story. "Guess the dog didn't make it," someone muttered. Marianne didn't respond. She was staring at the report in her hand, half reading, half denying. One house fire. One body. No forced entry. No witnesses. Conclusion. Domestic accident. But she'd known Mark, known how cautious he was, known he was asking too many questions about internal chain of evidence, known he didn't trust some of the men he worked beside. She also knew the station had pulled her off his case the minute his name came up. They called it a reassignment. She called it what it was, silencing. Still, there was no proof. Just fire. Just ashes. She closed the folder. Then came the call from the bakery on 5th. A little girl had been found wandering the alley out back, covered in soot, barefoot, holding a mangled teddy bear. She hadn't spoken a word, just kept whispering into the fabric, over and over. "Max! Max!" Marianne arrived within minutes. The shop owner, an elderly woman with too much perfume and trembling hands, pointed toward the corner of the alley. She was just sitting there, like she'd been waiting. The child didn't cry. She just stared and held the bear. Marianne crouched beside her. "Sweetheart, Can you tell me your name? No answer. Where's your mommy or daddy? Nothing. Just that whisper again. Max. That's when Marianne saw it. A burn mark on the girl's wrist, faint but fresh, and tucked under her arm, part of a fireproof lining, probably from a duffel bag. Whoever had hidden her had done so with intention. Marianne drove her to the ER herself. The child was underweight, mild smoke inhalation, silent. That night, CPS took her in. No relatives came forward. No press release was made. There would be no headlines. No citywide mourning for the fallen officer. Just a quiet burial with a folded flag and a line item in a forgotten report. 2 weeks later, a foster family in the neighboring county signed papers. The girl, listed as Lena Mae Callahan, was adopted under sealed record. The case file was marked closed, but Marianne kept the photo. It was grainy, snapped on her old phone just before Lena was taken away. In it, the girl clutched the singed teddy bear like a lifeline. Her eyes weren't empty, they were waiting. For someone, for something, for him. The trucker who almost hit him swore the dog came out of nowhere. Just past mile marker, 42, near the tree line where the asphalt began to crumble and deer eyes glinted like ghosts in headlights, the German Shepherd had staggered onto the road, head low, limping. Blood drying along one flank. But what froze the man wasn't the dog's injuries, it was the way the animal didn't flinch, even as a semi roared past inches away. He just stood there, the driver told Animal Control later. Like he was waiting. 2 officers responded before sunrise. They found the shepherd curled beside a rusted mile post, breathing slow but steady. No collar, no tags. But what struck them first was his silence. Most strays barked, bit, shook. This one watched. When Officer Delaney crouched with a slip lead, the dog didn't resist. He simply rose gingerly and stepped forward, obedient. As if this wasn't new, as if he'd done this before. At the county shelter, the intake team took one look at his condition, dehydrated, scarred, and oddly muscular, and called the vet down from the training facility on Ridgepoint. No chip, she said, scanning twice. Not even a partial. His injuries weren't life-threatening, but they told a story. Scar tissue on the left shoulder, as if from an old gunshot or shrapnel. 2 partially healed lacerations along the rib cage. And most notably, a thin, near-surgical scar behind the right ear. Not fresh, not sloppy. Whoever this dog had belonged to, they hadn't been amateurs. They noted something else, too. His gaze. Steady, watchful, calculating. Not fearful, trained. 2 weeks later, he was transferred to the K9 evaluation unit. They gave him a number at first. Subject 17 Ampere. Then, a name. Axel. But it didn't stick. Not to him. Because from the moment they opened the gate at the training yard, it was clear this dog didn't need teaching, he needed remembering. He didn't respond to basic commands at first, but when one of the trainers, out of habit, whistled a military-style signal from his Army MP days, the dog's ears twitched. He turned his head. That night, they tested him further. He tracked scent trails twice as fast as the top rookies. He cleared obstacle courses with reflexes they couldn't explain, including ones he'd never been exposed to. He ignored loud noises, gunshots, sirens, but reacted sharply to the smell of fire accelerants. By the end of the week, Axel wasn't just passing, he was outperforming fully trained canine second. The head instructor, Sergeant Cooper, stood by the gate one afternoon, arms folded as the shepherd completed a 3-stage narcotics run in under 3 minutes. He's either a prodigy, he muttered, or someone erased his file. That night, in the far end of the kennel, Axel didn't sleep. He lay still, eyes open, as the rows of metal fencing glowed faintly under the buzzing fluorescence. Across from him, younger dogs whimpered and turned in their sleep. Axel didn't move. His left ear flicked once. Down the corridor, a radio crackled. A familiar voice, not the words, but the tone flickered in the dark. And for a fraction of a second, something surfaced in his eyes. A memory without shape, a name without sound. Then it passed. He rested his head on his paws. Not defeated, only waiting. As if something deep inside him still believed someone would come. The police station lobby was a strange place for a child to carry a funeral bear. The receptionist, busy with intake forms and radio chatter, gave her a quick glance, then a double take. The girl stood near the benches, holding a stuffed animal to her chest like it held air. Her knuckles were pale. Her shoes didn't match. Lieutenant Diaz noticed her next. He had just stepped out from an internal briefing, coffee cooling in hand, when the foster mother waved him down. "This is the girl from the funeral," she whispered. "Lena. She says she has something important. About the dog." Lena looked up at him, not with fear, but with a steadiness that unsettled him. "Hi," he said gently, crouching. "You okay, sweetheart?" She didn't answer. Instead, she unwrapped her arm slowly, revealing the worn, soot-stained teddy bear. One side of its stitched ear had come undone. Its chest was a patchwork of fabric and time. She lifted it, carefully, and whispered, "It still has his fur." Diaz blinked. "Whose?" She didn't hesitate. "Max." The name dropped like a pebble in still water. He looked at the foster mother, who just shook her head helplessly. Lena pressed the bear forward. "It was on him, the night of the fire. He pushed me into the tunnel. I held on to this." Her voice trembled not from confusion, but memory. Diaz took the bear delicately. His hands, usually firm from decades of field work, felt unsure holding something so small, so significant. He turned it over. And there it was, clinging between the fibers just under the stitched button jacket, a single strand of coarse black and tan hair. It looked recent. "You're saying this is the same dog that was at the funeral?" he asked softly. Lena nodded. "He knew me. No one else believed. But he did." Diaz stood slowly. The hallway noise behind him had faded into a sort of waiting hush. "Okay," he said, turning toward the rear corridor. "Let's check something." The vet technician didn't laugh. She was young, early 30s, maybe, but the kind with tired eyes that had already seen too much. Diaz handed her the bear in a sealed evidence bag, his expression unreadable. "It came from the girl," he explained. "She thinks it might have trace fur from a dog named Max, the same dog that might now be registered in our canine system as Axel." The tech raised an eyebrow. "That's a hell of a stretch." "I know, but just humor me." She nodded. "If the strand's viable, we can extract trace mitochondrial DNA. Compare it to what we've logged under Axel's medical file." "You'd really do that?" She shrugged. "It's not standard. But neither is a dog-breaking protocol at a funeral to lay his head on a little girl's feet." Diaz almost smiled. Later that afternoon, in the low hum of the evidence room, Diaz stood alone, staring through the glass panel into the canine kennels across the way. Axel was there, lying down, watching the door, waiting. Diaz didn't know what it was, instinct maybe, but something told him that dog had more to say than his silence allowed. A quiet voice behind him said, "Hey, Lieutenant." It was the tech, holding the sample tube in one gloved hand. "There's enough material. We're running it now." Diaz crossed his arms. "And what do you think?" She looked at the bear, then at the window. "I think that girl's holding on to something stronger than memory." There was a pause. Then she added almost under her breath, "Still, remembering a dog from when she was 3? That's pushing it." Diaz said nothing, because deep down, something didn't feel pushed. It felt true. The kennel was quiet that night. But Axel wasn't. It started with a sound softer than a growl, sharper than a sigh. A low whine, caught somewhere between instinct and grief. Officer Rivas, Axel's current K9 handler, was finishing paperwork in the adjacent room when he heard it. Not the usual restlessness of bored patrol dogs. Not the sharp barks of aggression or the anxious pacing of rookies. This was different. He set down his pen and stepped into the dimly lit hall, where steel kennels lined both sides like quiet sentries. Most of the dogs were asleep or curled into corners, but not Axel. The German Shepherd sat rigid, not facing the gate but the wall. In front of him, resting gently on the concrete floor, was the evidence bag containing Lena's teddy bear. Someone, likely Diaz, had placed it there for temporary scent evaluation. Axel hadn't touched it, but he hadn't moved away either. Rivas crouched, watching. Axel's ears were flat, his tail still. He stared at the bear like it held a voice only he could hear. Then, without warning, he lifted one paw slowly and placed it against the clear plastic, as if trying to reach the softness beneath. "Axel," Rivas called softly. The dog didn't respond, only pressed his paw harder, then gave another small, broken whine. It wasn't frustration. It was mourning. By morning, Axel refused his food. Not just skipped it, ignored it entirely. And when Revis tossed a chew toy into the corner, Axel didn't flinch. But when Revis brought out an old box of retired canine collars to replace a few outdated ones, Axel's posture shifted. He stood abruptly, head low, tail raised not in aggression, but alertness. One collar in particular had slid free from the tangle and dropped onto the floor. It was older than the rest, worn leather, the kind used over a decade ago. Axel stepped forward, slow and deliberate, ignoring the others. He sniffed it once, then let out a short, sharp bark. Revis flinched. That bark, it was sharp, intentional, like a command response. But no one had given a command. "Buddy, what's going on with you?" Axel took the collar gently between his teeth, carried it to the back of the kennel, laid it down, and curled around it. Not guarding it, not chewing it, just being near it. Later that afternoon, Revis met with Sergeant Cooper in the K9 yard, concern written all over his face. "He's not acting like himself," Revis said, arms crossed. "He's trained, controlled, predictable. But since that funeral," Cooper glanced at the field where a few other dogs were mid-drill. "He bites someone, number. That's just it. He's calm, but different. He's ignoring food. He whines when he smells the teddy bear, but won't touch it. And earlier, he found an old collar from storage and carried it like it was sacred." Cooper frowned. "A scent memory, maybe. That's not all. I brought in Lena's sweater just to test, and Axel wouldn't stop circling the crate it was in. It's like something in him woke up." Cooper was silent for a beat, then said, "What if this dog didn't come to us as a blank slate?" Revis blinked. "You think he had prior training?" "I think he had a life before this. One that left a mark we never saw because we weren't looking." That night, Revis returned to the kennel alone. He unlocked Axel's gate and sat inside, back against the metal wall. Axel padded over slowly, still carrying the collar. "You're not just reacting," Revis murmured. "You're remembering." Axel rested his head on the officer's knee, something he rarely did. And for the first time, Revis noticed something in the dog's gaze he couldn't explain. Recognition not of him, but of something deeper, of someone else, someone long lost. Detective Ian Holt wasn't the kind of man who believed in ghosts, but something about that funeral stayed with him. The way the dog Axel had disobeyed every command in front of a courtroom full of brass, the girl's whisper, her name, Max. It rang too clean to be coincidence. That evening, long after the department lights had dimmed and the parking lot thinned out, Holt found himself in the records room. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving the room the feeling of something forgotten. Dust coated the drawers like a second skin. A monitor flickered at the far desk, still logged in under someone who'd gone home. He keyed in the name, Mark Callahan. The system paused, then blinked. Access restricted. Clearance required. Holt frowned. "Come on." He pulled rank. Entered his credentials. Still blocked. So he shifted his approach and ran it through the death records database instead. Fire. Single casualty. Location, 221 Grafton Street. Victim, male, unidentified. DNA, degraded. Match, assumed, based on address. Case closed. He leaned back slowly, heart settling into a new rhythm. Assumed. Not confirmed. He clicked again. No dental records. No cross-matches. The forensic team had never definitively ID'd the body. Just filled in the blanks. And then there was the dog. Animal remains found. Possibly K9. Too damaged for identification. No chip. No tag. No full autopsy report. Too many maybes. Too many assumptions. Holt's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a closed case. It was a buried one. The next day, he pulled a favor from the evidence archivist, an old friend named Rory who owed him more than a few late-night bourbon talks. Rory met him by the rear exit with a slim manila envelope. "This is all they gave me," he muttered. "Most of it's redacted. Internal Affairs flagged it years ago. Never reopened." Holt flipped the file open beneath the sun-faded light. Half the documents were blacked out. One photo remained. A scorched basement hatch, blown open from the inside. He tapped the edge. They said it was a domestic accident, Rory added. Gas leak or something. There were gunshots. Rory hesitated. I didn't say that. No, Holt muttered. But she did. Rory blinked. Who? Holt didn't answer. He was already walking away. They met near the park, where the trees still wore early autumn like a memory not quite ready to leave. Lena sat on the bench beside her foster mother, clutching the same teddy bear. It seems even looser now. She didn't speak until Holt sat down across from her, notepad untouched in his lap. Do you remember that night? He asked gently. She nodded. There was yelling. My daddy said to stay in the tunnel. Max stayed too. Holt studied her face. Do you remember hearing anything else? Lena hesitated, then whispered. The door closed. And then I heard 3 pops, like firecrackers. But Max, he didn't bark. He just looked at me, like he knew something was wrong. Oh, and you stayed there? Until morning. Then I walked. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. The foster mother cleared her throat. Detective, I don't mean to sound dismissive, but she was 3. Trauma can twist memories. Holt looked at the girl again. Or it can preserve the parts that matter most. He turned to Lena once more. What made you say that the dog at the funeral was Max? She didn't answer right away. She just reached into her coat and pulled out a small object metal, faded, worn. A fragment of a tag. Mox. The rest burned away. I never showed anyone this before, she said. But he used to wear it. It was hot when I touched it after the fire, so I wrapped it in cloth. Holt felt his breath tighten. Do you want me to find out what happened to him? He asked softly. Lena finally smiled. And it wasn't the smile of a child clinging to fantasy. It was the smile of someone who'd waited years to be believed. The hum of the archive lab was low and constant, like a machine breathing just under its breath. In a windowless back room of the precinct, Detective Holt leaned over a monitor, its aging screen flickering with washed-out footage from the night of the fire 6 years ago. He didn't expect much. Most traffic cams from that stretch of Grafton Street were motion-triggered and poorly maintained. Their timestamps often misaligned, their images fogged by weather or dust on the lens. But something about the layout of the street gnawed at him. One intersection just 2 blocks from the Callahan residence had a city-funded upgrade after a pileup months before the fire. That meant new cameras, high resolution, continuous feed, and possibly memory. He'd filed the request under a traffic pattern analysis flag, nothing that would draw attention from internal affairs. Still, it had taken favors. And hours. And a technician named Marcus who owed Holt more than just a clean uniform inspection. Now, here it was, the 19th of March, 11:42 p.m. The timestamp matched the rough window of the fire, and the image was surprisingly clear. At first, all Holt saw was silence. An empty street, sodium lights casting long yellow shadows, a mailbox, a dog crossing the far curb, possibly a stray. Then, headlights. They appeared from the eastern edge of the frame. Moving fast. No sirens, no traffic. Just motion. The vehicle was a black van. No logos. No license plate. It ran the stop sign without hesitation. No horn. No brake. The angle wasn't perfect, but Holt could make out something in the passenger seat. A silhouette. Large. Still. Facing forward. Like it didn't need to look back. The van disappeared toward the west, toward Grafton Street. Then the footage stopped. 10 seconds. Holt blinked. He rewound. Played again. 10 seconds. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. He checked the footage logs, file length, data stream, compression stamps. There should have been 43 minutes of archived video for that night. All that remained. 10 seconds. A van. A blur. And an absence. Someone pulled the plug, he muttered. Marcus leaned over his shoulder, confused. That doesn't make sense. These files aren't even user accessible. No admin override? No record of deletion. Holt didn't answer. His gut already had. This wasn't deletion. It was redirection. Like a river dammed underground. He leaned in again. froze the frame on the van. No plate. But the bodywork had a faint scar across the rear left panel. A welded seam, like it had been reinforced. Or patch it after damage. Can you enhance that? He asked. Marcus raised a brow. Only in movies. Holt smiled faintly. Try anyway. He left the station 30 minutes later. The image burned into his mind. Black van. Ghost driver. No trace before or after. He drove the long way back, stopping in front of the lot where the Callahan house once stood. It was now an empty plot. Weeds curling through fence, cracks like fingers, too tired to fight anymore. The only light came from the street lamp above. A soft wind stirred something in the corner, a bit of plastic or paper caught on rusted wire. He got out of the car, walked to the fence, and stared at the silence. If that van wasn't a coincidence, it meant the fire wasn't either. It meant someone came that night silent, fast, and without intention of being seen. It meant Mark Callahan hadn't died in an accident. And it meant Lena's dreams weren't dreams. They were memory. Someone had tried to erase the past, but they forgot the street had eyes. And Holt, he was learning how to make them talk. Some silence doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing too much. The cabin sat at the edge of a dry ridge, 30 miles past anything you'd call a town. No mailbox, no phone line. The dirt path that led to it was swallowed by brush, as if the world itself had agreed to forget. Detective Ian Holt parked at the edge of the hill and made the rest of the way on foot. Twigs cracked beneath his boots. The air smelled like pine and rain-dried wood smoke. He spotted the chimney first, then the porch, a slouching square of timber barely held up by rusted nails and time. The cabin had the look of a place that didn't want to be found. But Holt was never much for taking hints. He stepped up to the door and knocked once, then twice. Nothing. He was about to try again, when a voice rasped from inside. "Don't—" The door creaked open slowly. A man stood in the shadows, the barrel of a shotgun tilted low, not quite aimed, but not pointed away either. "You're wasting your gas, detective," the man said. "Dominic Price?" Holt asked calmly. The man nodded once. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Holt said. "I'm just chasing ghosts." "You found one." Holt glanced past him. The cabin was sparse, no pictures on the wall, no television, no warmth, just a cot, a kettle, and a wood stove. A life reduced to necessity. "I need to ask you about Mark Callahan," Holt said. Dominic didn't move. "The fire, the girl, the missing dog. You were his partner." "I was." Holt took a breath. "Then why didn't you testify? There was no statement from you. Not even a word on record." Price looked away, jaw working under his gray stubble. His voice, when it came, was rough from disuse. "Because by the time they asked, I already knew the answers didn't matter." He turned and walked back inside. Holt followed, uninvited. Dominic didn't seem to care. He poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from Holt at the small table. The cabin creaked softly, like it was listening. "They weren't after Mark," Dominic said finally. "They were after what he knew." Holt leaned in. "Then what did he know?" A silence passed between them. Not empty heavy, like something trying to rise after years of being buried. "We'd stumbled onto something," Dominic said. "A file. Internal Affairs read, tagged it before we even got a copy. But Mark, he kept a printout, brought it home, said he'd take it to the press if anything happened to him." Holt tensed. "Do you know where it went?" "No idea. Could be ash now. Could be in the walls. But someone else wanted it gone. Badly." "You think they torched the house?" "I don't think," Dominic muttered. "I know. I saw the van." Holt's blood went cold. "The night of the fire?" he asked. Dominic nodded. "Unmarked. Black. No plates. Same one that tailed us 3 weeks prior when Mark started poking around city contracts." Holt exhaled slowly. "Why didn't you come forward with this?" Dominic's eyes met his tired, unflinching. "Because the day after the fire, someone slid a picture under my door. My sister. Her kids. Schoolyard. Home address written on the back. No note. No signature. Just a reminder. And you stayed quiet." Dominic didn't answer. He didn't have to. Holt felt the weight of it. Some choices don't get made. They get survived. He pulled a photo from his pocket and slid it across the table. Lena, 8 years old, eyes too old for her age, clutching a tattered bear. A German shepherd beside her. He's still alive, Holt said. They renamed him Axel, gave him a badge. He found her at a funeral and hasn't left her side since. Dominic's hand trembled as he picked up the photo.
"She was 3,
he whispered.
She wasn't supposed to remember."
She did, Holt said. And she's starting to talk. I think it's time the adults do too. For a long moment, Dominic said nothing. Then he reached beneath the table and pulled out an old cigar box. Inside were newspaper clippings, an SD card in a plastic sleeve, and a folded letter. He pushed it toward Holt. "I never read the letter," he said, "but it's in Mark's handwriting." Holt took the box with both hands, something like reverence in his touch. "I can't protect you," he said honestly. "I know," Dominic replied, "but I'm tired of living like I need to be." The cabin smelled of old pine, rusted gun oil, and something else, something heavier. Guilt, maybe, or memory. Detective Holt hadn't moved since Dominic Price slid the cigar box across the table. His fingers hovered just above the contents, as if touching them might change the story he thought he knew. "You're sure this was Mark's?" Holt asked. Price gave a tired nod. "He handed it to me the night before he died. Told me if anything happened to him, to burn it. I didn't. Couldn't." The SD card lay inside a plastic sleeve, its label rubbed off, faded like time had tried to erase it. Holt picked it up carefully, like it might still be warm with the weight of a secret. "He made enemies," Dominic said. "Not the kind you argue with, the kind who already made up their minds." Holt's voice lowered. "So why didn't he go public?" "He was going to, but not without backup." Dominic hesitated, eyes flicking to the side as if chasing a thought that kept dodging him. I think he had a plan." Holt looked up. "What do you mean?" Dominic swallowed. "You remember that dog, Max?" Holt nodded. "The one who vanished the night of the fire. Lena swears Axel is him." Dominic tapped a finger on the wood. "Mark trusted that dog more than most people. Said he was smarter than half the damn precinct." Holt allowed a faint smile. German shepherds tend to make believers out of cynics. Dominic's tone dropped. That night, I think Mark knew it was coming. He had this strange calm about him. Said he'd put everything in the only place they wouldn't check. I thought he meant a safe house, or some locked folder. But, he leaned forward. What if it wasn't a place at all? What if it was Max? Holt stiffened. "You're saying the dog was carrying something?" "A collar. That thing was reinforced, heavy duty, and he always had it on, even at home. What if Mark hit a drive in it? You think Max ran with the evidence?" Dominic gave a single, grim nod. Or was trained to. Mark had been experimenting with memory drills, scent mapping. That dog could have followed Lena across the state blindfolded. Holt's mind raced. So if the collar still exists, it could hold everything. They both sat in silence, the thought hanging between them like a loaded gun on the table. "I never saw it again," Dominic said. "After the fire, they claimed they recovered dog remains. But there was no DNA match, no collar, because the dog lived," Holt murmured, "and became Axel." Dominic looked away. "You think Mark was a traitor?" he said quietly. "But what if he was the only honest one left in that building?" "I never said he was a traitor." "But they will," Dominic said. "They already did. Mark's name is barely a whisper at the department. And now they'll paint this as some conspiracy fantasy. Unless you find the truth." Holt stood slowly, gripping the SD card like it was a key to a locked door he'd never known existed. "I'm going to find the collar," he said. Dominic looked up. "You better hurry." "Why?" "Because if someone else figures it out first, they won't come for the dog. They'll come for the girl." The grainy footage clicked to life on the screen, time-stamped nearly 6 years ago. But the clarity of the moment sliced through time like a blade. Axel stood still in the middle of the K9 training compound, his posture taut, alert, yet unnervingly focused. Even among the roughest recruits, he had stood out, not just for his size or the unusual depth in his eyes, but for something the trainers couldn't name, something that felt like memory. Detective Holt leaned closer over the workstation, watching the screen as the veteran K9 handler beside him paused the video. "Watch this," said Sergeant Rick Morales, a retired canine unit trainer with 32 years of muscle memory etched into his bones. He wore a ball cap that said, "Never doubt the nose," and spoke in gravel-thick tones, the kind you trust before you question. He rewound the tape. Axel, just weeks into the program, had been ordered to sit, then lie down. But before the handler could even issue the second command, Axel shifted, already responding. "See that?" Morales asked. "Quick reflexes? Number recognition. That's not someone learning a cue. That's someone remembering one." Holt frowned. "Dogs pick up fast." "Sure. But watch this next part." Morales tapped the keyboard again. The video jumped forward. A man in fatigues entered the training yard and raised his hand in a subtle, low-motion arc, a nonverbal military hand signal used for tactical flank movement. Axel responded instantly. No hesitation. No confusion. He moved to the handler's blind side, dropped low, waited. Exact position. Exact distance. No one taught him that in the academy. "That's not stray dog instinct," Morales said. "That's Tier 1 obedience. Military grade." Holt stared at the screen, chilled by the realization. "You're saying he was trained before he got here?" "I'm saying someone put thousands of hours into that animal. This wasn't some highway rescue. He came with something built in." Morales clicked to the next clip. The date flashed, 2 months into Axel's entry. A standard medical check, recorded per protocol. As the vet examined Axel's underside, the camera caught something small but unmistakable. A curved scar low on the belly, like a jagged half-moon. Morales hit pause. "You see it?" Holt nodded slowly. "Same place as..." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a dog-eared photo from the Callahan family archive. A little girl, Lena, at barely 3, hugging a German shepherd on the front porch of a white farmhouse. The dog's belly bore the same half-moon scar. A mark it got, according to reports, after leaping into a thorn-lined ravine to break the girl's fall. Emergency stitches had saved its life. Max. It wasn't just the training. It wasn't just the muscle memory or the scent triggers. The body itself remembered. "You still doubt it's the same dog?" Morales asked. "No," Holt murmured, voice like gravel under pressure. "I'm beginning to doubt it ever wasn't." They sat in silence, broken only by the quiet whir of the fan inside the terminal. "I want to bring him in," Holt finally said. Morales shook his head. "He's still on active duty. Part of SWAT rotation. If you file anything official, command will lock it up. Chain of custody. Evidence contamination. Hell, they'll say it's a child's imagination." "What if she's right?" Holt said. "What if he's Max? Then that dog's carrying more than memories." They looked back at the frozen frame, Axel's eyes caught in mid-blink. The scar, a quiet truth no one had thought to question. "She said she never stopped dreaming about him," Holt added. "Every year, same night." Morales exhaled slowly. "You know what they say about dogs?" "What?" "They never forget who loved them when no one else did." Detective Holt didn't like suits, but this morning he wore one. Not because of respect, not even for protocol, but because he knew stone walls didn't fall from fists. They crumbled when a man walked in looking like he had nothing left to prove. The elevator groaned as it carried him to the 9th floor of the precinct's administrative wing, internal affairs, the place where careers quietly disappeared. He walked in with a manila folder tucked beneath his arm. Inside were 3 photos, 2 printouts from a veterinary database, and a handwritten letter from a girl who still called a police dog Max. A receptionist glanced up, startled. Holt didn't wait. "Lieutenant Grayson, now." "Sir, do you have an appointment?" I said now. Moments later, the frosted glass door to IA opened. Lieutenant Gerald Grayson stood in the doorway like someone who'd once made hard decisions and now only defended them. Silver-haired, spine too straight, voice too practiced. "Detective Holt," Grayson said. "I hear you've been stirring puddles where there's no rain. I have questions about a case from 6 years ago, the Callahan fire." Grayson's jaw twitched once, a reflex he couldn't hide. "That case is closed. I'm reopening it." "No, you're not." Grayson stepped aside, letting Holt into his office. Walls of plaques and commendations flanked the room like guards, but there was no chair offered, no gesture of welcome. "You filed no official motion. You're not with major crimes. and you're operating outside your jurisdiction. Holt didn't blink. Then let me be clear. I have evidence suggesting the K9 currently named Axel is actually Max Callahan, the same dog reported dead in that fire. A decorated asset, a stolen identity, and possibly a walking piece of evidence in a buried corruption case. Grayson's voice remained flat. The dog is city property.
City property doesn't dream about little girls.
That's not admissible. But you know what is. Holt pulled out the photo Max with Lena on the porch and set it beside a still from the training room footage. Scars match, behavior matches, training level well above protocol for a stray, and you've got a girl who never once forgot him. Grayson didn't look down. The fire report was certified by 2 federal agencies, both of which redacted the coroner's identity, and you never ran a DNA match on the canine remains. You just assumed it was Max. Grayson's nostrils flared. Because that's what we were told. By who? No answer. I've seen the early command logs. Someone pulled the original footage from traffic cams. The backup drive? Corrupted. The fire department's notes? Missing. Grayson turned to the window. You're chasing ghosts, detective. I'm chasing truth. A long silence followed. Then Grayson said, barely above a whisper,
You don't know what you're stepping into.
I know a father was silenced. A dog vanished, and a child was told none of it mattered. Grayson turned back to him, voice clipped. Drop it. Number. Then understand this. The higher you go, the colder it gets. People don't want the truth. They want the quiet. Holt leaned in. Then they picked the wrong dog to silence. And downstairs, word was already spreading. Whispers by the coffee machines. Paper trails that once looked like routine reassignment now read like exile. Officers who used to work the night shift with Mark Callahan had been transferred, demoted, some retired early without warning. And then came the leak. An anonymous file sent to Holt's personal inbox. No header, no body, just one attachment. FD12, case report, redacted, PDF. He clicked. It was the fire incident report, the official one. But this time, the digital watermark had been scrubbed. And, in its place, a note buried in the metadata. Check the timestamps. Report filed before the fire was contained. Holt scrolled to the bottom. Final declaration of scene safety. 3:14 a.m. Incident logged as accidental. 3:09 a.m. 5 minutes before the fire crews finished, his blood went cold. Someone knew how the fire would end before it ended, and someone wanted it buried. The email arrived at 6:14 a.m. Dr. Maren Voss hadn't even had her first coffee when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She wiped her hands on a towel, crossed the tile barefoot, and opened the message with a kind of breathless caution only scientists and truth-tellers truly understood. The subject line was one word: match. She blinked, read it again. Then she scrolled to the body of the email, where the data lit up like a verdict. Sample A, teddy bear fiber. Sample B, oral swab, registered as Axel, K9 to 4127. Result, 99.9% genetic match. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the mug beside her. The name Axel felt suddenly too small. This wasn't just a result, it was a resurrection. By 9 a.m., the news had breached the precinct like a wave hitting concrete. It started with whispers. Then someone leaked a screenshot to the local blog, the Marlowe Minute. And within the hour, the headline spread like wildfire. Police K9 identified as lost family dog in cold case fire. Phones rang. Cameras rolled. Reporters crowded outside the department building like scavengers circling a fresh carcass. Everyone wanted the same thing: a statement, a photo, a soundbite. Anything that could explain how a little girl's teddy bear just cracked open 6 years of silence. Detective Holt stood by the vending machines when it hit the national wires. CNN, then MSNBC, then an online op-ed titled "Property or Person: The Legal Status of Police Dogs with a Past." Lena's foster mother had to unplug the phone. She shielded the girl from the windows, pulled the curtains, and hid the remote. But nothing could stop Lena from hearing the name she hadn't said aloud in years now, echoing from televisions, car radios, even strangers on the street. Max. Not Axel. Max. Her Max. Inside a makeshift press room at the department, the mood was tense. Lieutenant Grayson stood stiffly behind the podium, flanked by two stone-faced officers from the Legal Affairs Unit. The room was hot lit by too many camera rigs, too many expectations. Reporters leaned forward like wolves, scenting weakness. "We are aware," Grayson began, "of the DNA test results that have been circulating in the media. At this time, the canine known as Axel remains a registered asset of the Marlow Police Department. But if he belonged to the Callahan family," one reporter cut in. "We are conducting a thorough internal review," Grayson replied, voice brittle. "This department takes matters of chain of custody seriously, but we remind the public that dogs, including K9 units, are not classified as individuals under current municipal law." A woman in the back stood up. No microphone, no badge, just a trembling voice. "Then how do you explain the way he looked at her?" The room went quiet. Grayson stared, blinked once, and said nothing, because he couldn't. Later that night, Lena sat curled up on the living room couch, her arms wrapped around the same bear that had started it all. She didn't say much, not to the reporters, not to the lawyers who came knocking, not even to Holt when he visited with kind eyes and quiet steps. But when no one was listening, she leaned close to the bear's stitched ear and whispered, "You're coming home soon." That same evening, a segment aired on national television. An anchor with silver hair and practiced sincerity looked into the camera and said, "Tonight, we explore a case that blurs the line between ownership and belonging. Can a dog be city property if he had a life, a family, and a name before the badge? And more importantly, what happens when the past doesn't stay buried?" The footage that followed showed Axel Max performing a flawless search maneuver, then cut to a still photo of Lena, barely 3 years old, cradled next to him on a porch swing, the scar on his left shoulder visible even then. The anchor closed the segment with a soft breath. Sometimes the truth doesn't bark. It waits, patiently, until someone listens. Back at the precinct, Holt received a message anonymous. No subject line, just 5 words. "Max remembers, but do you?" It came with an attachment. A blurry photo, the edge of a file folder, a label on the spine, CI, Callahan, Asset 9B, and scrawled in the corner, almost hidden by shadow, 3 letters, MPD. The courtroom was too cold. Marble floors stretched beneath pew-like benches, every inch polished, but indifferent, like the law itself. High above, stained glass panels muted the morning sun into fractured beams that painted the wood with distant gold. Lena sat quietly in the front row, legs swinging above the floor. The teddy bear was in her lap, arms worn thin where she gripped it. Her foster mother's hand rested gently on her back. But all of Lena's attention, every breath, every quiet heartbeat, was fixed on the German shepherd sitting beside the bailiff's chair. Axel. Or, to her, still and forever, Max. The city's legal team arrived in tailored suits and hard shoes that echoed too loud in the solemn chamber. At their table, 3 lawyers whispered over open binders filled with training logs, vet bills, department budgets. On the opposite side, a single woman stood calmly in a gray dress suit. Her name was Claire Manning. And today, she wasn't just a lawyer, she was the voice of a child who'd lost everything once and refused to lose it again. The judge entered. "All rise." The room stood, then settled, and the firestorm began. "Your Honor," the city's lead attorney began, "we acknowledge the emotional weight of the situation, but the facts remain. The dog known as Axel was found without identification and entered into the Marlow K9 training program through official channels. The city has invested over $72,000 in training, healthcare, and deployment since his registration. He is, by all legal standards, city property." Claire rose, calm, collected, but something burned just under the surface. "Your Honor, we are not disputing that Axel received public training. What we are asserting is that he should never have been in that system to begin with." She held up a manila folder and approached the bench. "This," she said, laying it down, "is the DNA report. It links the fur from my client's teddy bear kept since age 3 with the saliva of the dog seated in this courtroom. A 99.9% match. This is not just a coincidence. This is a recovery. He wasn't found unclaimed. He was stolen. Gasps stirred through the gallery. Cameras clicked like insects along the press rail. The city attorney pressed his glasses higher. We respect the emotion here, but this is not a custody dispute. It's an administrative one. The department did not steal a dog. It accepted a stray with no tag, no microchip, no clear record. Claire didn't blink. You didn't accept a stray. You accepted a hero in hiding. End of 40. She turned slightly, motioning toward the scar visible along Axel's left flank. That scar matches the one Max received, protecting Lena from a fall down a ravine when she was 2. We have medical records from the family vet in Oak Ridge. We have photos. We have behavioral video comparisons from when he first entered K9 training. He already responded to advanced hand signals. That is not the behavior of a stray. That is a memory in motion. The judge leaned forward. His voice was even, but firm. Miss Manning, are you asking this court to legally reassign the ownership of a K9 unit based on pre-service identity? Yes, Your Honor, she replied. We're asking this court to recognize what the law forgot dogs are, more than property. They are partners, and Max has already chosen. At that, Claire turned to the bench behind her and gave a small nod. Lena rose, quietly, with all the courage her 8-year-old frame could hold. She walked to the front of the room, the bear still clutched in one hand. She didn't speak, just knelt. And Axel, who had been trained to sit, stay, and obey no matter the noise, no matter the command broke protocol, he rose, walked, and lay his head gently in the crook of Lena's lap. Silence swallowed the room. No one needed a verdict to feel the truth. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with news vans, satellite dishes, protest signs. A growing tide of public voices rose in support. Let Max go home. He's not a tool, he's family. Justice for Lena, Max. The city tried to hold the line. Rules, budgets, precedent. But something had shifted. Because people weren't just seeing a police dog anymore. They were seeing a lost son. A memory returned. A scarred survivor who had waited 6 years to lay his head where he belonged. That night, on national television, a panel of legal analysts debated the implications. He's technically property, one said, but property doesn't dream, the other countered. And dogs like him, they remember more than we want to believe. Back inside Lena's home, she was already asleep. Axel Max lay on the floor beside her bed, ears twitching at each sound. The bear rested between them, a silent witness to everything that had been lost and finally found again. And as the world fought over what should happen next, Lena whispered in her sleep, "Please don't leave this time." He didn't move. He wouldn't. Not again. The final day began like a whisper before a storm. Outside the courthouse, the city simmered. Protesters lined the steps, pressed against police barricades with signs hoisted skyward. He's not property. Let Max go home. Dogs remember. But inside, it was still. Too still. As if the walls were holding their breath. Lena sat on the same bench as before, small in her pressed dress and worn sneakers, the teddy bear cradled against her chest. Her foster mother beside her, hands folded, eyes rimmed with quiet worry. Axel, no. Max rested at her feet, alert but still, his tail unmoving, his breath calm, as if he knew what was about to happen and was simply waiting for it to begin. Judge Hewitt entered, his robes slightly creased, the morning sun streaking across his silver hair like the final lines of an old painting. He didn't look at the attorneys first. He looked at the dog. Then he said, with no flair and no filter, "Before we proceed, let me be clear. This is not a case about animal welfare. It is not about budget allocations. It is about one question, and one only. Lem?" He turned his gaze to the full courtroom, thick with media and city officials and families watching this like a custody trial dressed in a badge. "Is this dog still a police asset or someone's stolen family?" The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was reverent. No papers rustled. No phones buzzed. The city lawyer rose stiffly from his chair, but before he could speak, a soft, nearly imperceptible sound broke the stillness. Paw steps. Axel moved. He hadn't been called. No one gave a command. He simply stood, walked forward between the two tables where opposing counsel sat, and paused at the heart of the room. His ears twitched. His nose lifted slightly. Then he turned. He looked at Lena and walked straight toward her. Lena's eyes filled before the tears fell. She didn't move, just watched, her fingers trembling on the bear's paw. Axel stopped in front of her, nuzzled the stuffed animal gently, and then turning away from her, strode toward the judge's bench. The bailiff moved forward instinctively, but the judge lifted a hand. "Let him." Axel approached the dais. And then, with the kind of slow, solemn motion that felt more like choice than instinct, he placed himself between the judge and the child. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just stood quiet, unmoving, a barrier of loyalty carved in living flesh and memory. The courtroom cracked open, not with sound, but with something deeper, something no ruling could undo. A female officer at the back whispered, "He's guarding her." A local reporter typed one word into their notepad, "testimony," and for a long moment, Judge Hewitt said nothing. He leaned forward, elbows on the polished oak, hands steepled beneath his chin. His eyes, tired from decades of paperwork and evidence, flickered not with procedure but with recognition, because here was something the law had never learned how to hold. Memory, instinct, devotion beyond command. The city lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this is not a performance." Judge Hewitt cut in quietly. "No one trained him to do that. That's not asset behavior. That's memory." He turned to Claire Manning. "Miss Manning, do you have anything further before I deliberate?" She stood. Her voice was quiet but filled with something that reached even the far corners of the courtroom. "No, Your Honor. I believe Max just spoke for all of us." The judge rose. A hush swept through the room like wind brushing wheat. "I'm going to take 48 hours before issuing my final ruling. In the meantime," his gaze drifted again to the dog, "the court orders Axel to remain under protective observation. He will not return to active duty, nor will he be transferred." He looked to Lena, "And the child will have full supervised visitation until this case is resolved." Lena nodded. She didn't speak. Her small hand reached down, and Axel, without looking, lifted his paw to meet it. It was the only agreement that truly mattered that day. As people filed out, a news crew caught a shot of the two, the girl and the dog seated side by side beneath the towering seal of the state. The image would go viral within hours. A child too young to testify. A dog trained not to feel. And a courtroom that had no words for what love remembered. That night, Judge Hewitt sat alone in his chambers, the case file closed before him. He stared at the last image on the DNA report, the number stamped in bold, 99.9%. Then he looked at the photo from that morning. Not the paperwork, the picture. And for the first time in a long while, he understood that some verdicts aren't about guilt or law. Some verdicts are about home. The courthouse hadn't changed in 2 days. Same heavy wood paneling, same crack on the floor tile by the witness stand, same solemn flags motionless in the absence of wind. But something had shifted in the people. You could feel it in the stillness, not stiff like tension, but like reverence. A recognition that what had started as a custody battle over a dog had become something else. Something harder to define. Something deeply, irrevocably human. Lena sat quietly on the bench, swinging her legs without rhythm, the stuffed bear pressed close to her chest. Axel lay at her feet, chin between his paws, eyes trained on the front of the room, not in alertness, but in waiting. He knew. Somehow, he always knew. When Judge Hewitt entered, he didn't carry a stack of papers. Just a single manila folder and a worn fountain pen. His robe moved slightly as he sat, and for a long beat, he didn't speak. He looked at the girl, then at the dog, then down at the bench, as if the wood might whisper something he hadn't yet heard. Finally, his voice came, low but clear, with a gravity that made every neck straighten. "I've served 31 years on this bench. I've ruled on murder, fraud, civil disputes, and broken families. But never until this week have I ruled on memory." He paused, and I find myself humbled by it. He opened the manila folder. In the matter of custody and ownership regarding the German Shepherd designated Axel and claimed as Max by minor Lena Callahan, a silence fell like dust on polished marble. This court recognizes that the city has invested in the training and deployment of this canine as a police asset. But this court also acknowledges the DNA confirmation, the behavioral testimony, and what transpired in this very room. He looked up, voice softening. Sometimes the law bends to the truth, because the truth is older, deeper. He turned to Lena. Miss Callahan, this court grants you full legal custody of Axel, also known as Max. The girl blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Just a sharp inhale like something breaking free inside her after 6 long years of holding tight. Judge Hewitt continued. Axel is hereby honorably retired from active duty. His service to the city stands recognized, but from this day forward, he is not a police asset. He is a companion, a guardian. And by every measure that matters, he smiled gently, he is yours. The first sound was the gavel, a clean, deliberate tap. The second sound was applause. Slow at first from someone in the back, perhaps a court clerk, but it rose like morning light, breaking through fog. Even the city's lead attorney, who had fought with all the logic the law could offer, stood and joined. Perhaps because even she knew this wasn't a loss. It was a kind of justice the courtroom rarely witnessed. Axel rose and moved to Lena, pressing his head against her chest as she dropped to her knees. She didn't cry loudly, just held him, the way children do when they've been quiet for too long. Her face tucked into his fur, her fingers clutching his nameplate Axel, as if to tell him, I know who you really are. And he stood still as stone, letting her remember out loud. As the crowd began to disperse, reporters rushed to file their headlines. Judge Rule's dog is family, not property. DNA doesn't lie Axel is Max. Truth, memory, and the girl who never stopped believing. But Judge Hewitt remained at his bench, watching the two figures at the center of it all. He leaned to the clerk beside him. Make sure the retirement papers read, with honor and valor. He earned it. Outside, the sky had cleared. Lena and Axel stepped through the tall glass doors together. There were cameras, microphones, a blur of questions. But she didn't speak. Instead, she looked down at her dog and said simply, Home? His ears perked. He wagged once. And together, they walked down the courthouse steps, not as evidence, not as property, but as a family reunited. Later that night, on the local news, a segment aired showing the girl and the dog curled up on a couch. She had fallen asleep with her hand resting on his back, the bear by her side. The anchor's voice, tinged with warmth, said, Some cases are about ownership, others are about identity. But this was about love that remembered its way home. The file arrived in a plain envelope, sealed not with tape, but with silence. Judge Hewitt stared at it for a long moment before sliding his letter opener beneath the flap. No one else was in his chambers, just the ticking of the old wall clock and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. The room smelled of dust and old paper, and something older still, the weight of unfinished truth. Inside the envelope was a red-tabbed case file marked Callahan, Restricted Access. 6 years sealed, 6 years ignored. Now unsealed, at the request of the court. Not a single soul knew what would be inside, not even the detective who reopened it. But deep down, Judge Hewitt feared he did. The file was thicker than expected. Not just reports and statements, but inter-office memos, printed emails, blurry surveillance stills. Paper clipped to the top was a post-it note with one word, buried. He read slowly. The first page was the fire report. It named Officer Mark Callahan as deceased, cause of death, asphyxiation from smoke inhalation. No mention of gunshots. No mention of a second person on scene. No mention of a little girl locked in the basement tunnel, or the dog that likely saved her life. But then, 3 pages in, a supplemental note caught his eye. Recovered canine remains inconclusive. Estimated age 1-2 years. No chip, no dental records. Fur pattern inconsistent with known household animal. But report finalized under pressure from internal review. Finalized under pressure. He kept reading. The deeper into the file he went, the darker it got. A printout of a chain email between 3 lieutenants in the Internal Affairs Division referenced an unauthorized flash drive leak tied to Callahan's badge ID. One line stood out. He trained that dog too well. We may have a problem if it survived. Another report, half blackened with redactions, mentioned an incident at a secondary training site, a site not listed in any official K-9 registry. Coordinates were scribbled in the margin, just above the words, Black Ridge, Non-departmental contract. Do not archive. Hewitt sat back, heart pounding not from panic, but from the sheer gravity of it. This wasn't just a closed case. This was a suppression. Someone had tried to erase Max. Not because he was dangerous, but because he remembered too much. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Joel Ferris parked his car 2 blocks from the courthouse, avoiding the press. He walked in through a side entrance, credentials tucked in his pocket, and rode the elevator up to Hewitt's floor. When the judge opened the door, Joel didn't speak, just stepped inside and waited. The file was already spread across the desk. He was trying to blow the whistle, Hewitt said quietly, sliding over the memo. Callahan, not on a person, but on a system. Joel scanned the highlighted passage. The names listed were known. Some were still active in the department. A few had retired with honors. But what tied them together wasn't just their rank. It was a single shared access code listed on the final page. Clearance. Ops. Sen. Nimbus. What the hell is Nimbus? Joel asked. The judge exhaled slowly. That's what we need to find out. They found it buried in a briefing report dated 3 months before Callahan's death. The document referenced behavioral conditioning via canine proxy and listed 2 test subjects, Rex and Kilo. No photos, just file numbers. Lab initials stamped at the bottom, Burl 9, the same lab site marked on the coordinates from earlier. Joel's mouth went dry. Rex was Max's name in the system, he said, before Callahan renamed him. Hewitt nodded. And it says here that Rex exhibited atypical retention of scent memory and familial bonding beyond conditioning parameters. In other words, Joel said, he remembered his people. There was one last document in the file, handwritten. Callahan's signature at the bottom. It wasn't an official report. It was a note scanned and filed as personal property and never logged into evidence. It read, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to finish what I started. They'll say it was a fire, but it wasn't. Max knows. He saw it happen. I trained him not just to protect, but to remember. If he survives, he'll find Lena. And if someone tries to stop that, it's because they know what I buried in his collar. Trust the dog. Joel looked up. So it wasn't just memory. Max was carrying something. Data. Proof. The judge reached for the phone. Then we need to recover that collar. That night, in the quiet of her foster home, Lena ran her fingers along the old nylon collar kept in her drawer. The brass tag had faded, but the stitching remained slightly uneven along one edge, like someone had sewn it back together. She held it to her ear, like a child might with a seashell. I knew you didn't forget me, she whispered, barely audible. Outside her window, the moon was pale and full, like it had been the night of the fire. In her bones, she knew it was time. The past wasn't buried. It had just been waiting to be found. The collar had always felt heavier than it should. Lena sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, the same faded teddy bear resting by her knee. In her hands was the collar frayed in places, its stitching uneven, the metal tag dulled by time. But she wasn't looking at the tag. She was staring at the inside lining, where a thin seam puckered oddly, just beneath the left edge. She'd felt it 100 times before without knowing what it was. But after everything the judge had revealed, something tugged at her memory. A thread, waiting to be pulled. She turned on the desk lamp. Its warm light fell across the old fabric like sunlight across a battlefield. Quiet, still. She reached for her mother's sewing scissors, the ones she kept for school crafts, and gently began snipping the thread, one stitch, then another. Her hands trembled not from fear, but the weight of what might lie beneath. Then, a small panel of black nylon peeled back, and inside, wrapped in fire-singed gauze and plastic tape, was a flash drive, tiny, charred along one edge, but real. She didn't breathe for 5 full seconds, just stared, as if the air around her had thickened, as if the world was waiting too. Downstairs, she raced to the detective's car. Joel Ferris had left his engine running, unsure if tonight would lead to answers or another dead end. When he saw her, he rolled the window down halfway. "Lena!" She held out her hand, the flash drive cupped like it was something holy. "It was in Max's collar." He shut off the car. No words, Just quiet urgency as he opened the passenger door and let her in. The drive wouldn't open on his laptop, not at first. Whatever was on it was encrypted, shielded by layers of old police software protocols. Joel called in a favor. An old contact in digital forensics, Isaac Kim, a retired tech analyst with a love for unsolvable puzzles, answered on the second ring. "I need you to try something," Joel said. "Tonight." An hour later, they were in Isaac's basement, surrounded by servers and humming monitors. The room smelled like solder and coffee grounds. "Old sans-sec encryption," Isaac muttered, squinting at the screen. "Layered 3 times over. Whatever's on here, it wasn't meant to be seen by accident. Can you crack it?" Isaac didn't look away. "Ask me in 10 minutes. Lena sat silently on a stool in the corner, clutching Max's collar in her lap like it might vanish if she let go. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. But her fingers traced the frayed seam over and over, a child's rhythm to soothe a wound older than language. Then, "Got it." Isaac leaned back. "Decrypt complete. There's one file. Video. Timestamp 3 days before the fire." Joel looked at Lena. "You sure?" She nodded once. "Play it." The screen flickered. Then, a shaky image. A garage. Fluorescent light overhead. Mark Callahan stood in frame, the camera propped awkwardly on a shelf. He looked tired. Not disheveled, but like a man running out of road. Max was beside him, young and alert, ears perked. "If you're seeing this," Callahan began, voice low, "then I didn't make it." Lena's breath hitched. He continued, eyes not meeting the lens, but speaking to it like he was talking to someone he knew would understand someday. "I've filed 2 reports with Internal Affairs. Neither stuck. I've sent copies to a journalist I trust. He's since gone missing. This flash drive holds everything. Names, timestamps, training protocols. Illegal asset transfers through a black site posing as a canine development program." He placed a hand on Max's head. "They wanted dogs that could do more than sniff bombs. They wanted dogs that obeyed without conscience. But Max isn't that. He's more. He remembers. He loves. And I trained him to run if anything happened to me." He exhaled slowly, pain clear in his voice now. "I'm hiding him with my daughter if it comes to that. If they try to take me out, they'll try to take him too. But if he survives, and you find this..." He looked directly into the camera. "They didn't win." The video ended. No sound, no music, just the low hum of the server fans around them. Isaac turned slowly. "You do realize what you have here, right?" Joel nodded. "Evidence and motive." Lena didn't speak. She stood, quietly walked to the screen, and placed her palm on it right where her father's face had been. She didn't cry. She simply whispered, "I knew he didn't leave me." Not really. The storm hadn't started yet, but it was coming. Outside, the night was still, but the truth was already moving, like heat rising before lightning strikes. Tomorrow, the flash drive would go public. Tomorrow, the name Max would no longer be just a dog's process. It would be a memory that could not be silenced. A testimony carried not in words, but in loyalty, in survival, and in one scarred collar, stitched shut by a man who refused to let evil write the ending. The morning it aired, no one was ready. Not the mayor, not the commissioner, not the city that had grown so used to silence it mistook it for peace. But truth doesn't wait for permission. At exactly 7:02 a.m., the screen on every major news network cut to a special segment. No warning, no fanfare, just a title card in black and white. Testimony of Officer Mark Callahan, filed 3 days before his death. The footage rolled. His voice, weary but steady, filled living rooms and coffee shops and police precincts. His words, once buried in a scorched collar, now echoed across the nation like a resurrection. He spoke of names, of transfers and codes, of a black site disguised as a training facility for advanced canine assets, of threats made quietly, of colleagues who disappeared, one by one. And then he spoke of Max, of what the dog had seen, what he had survived, and why he had to disappear. They weren't training guardians, he said. They were breeding silence. Detective Joel Ferris watched it all unfold from a diner booth on 6th Street, a black coffee untouched in front of him. The television above the counter was muted, but the caption said enough. Corruption claim tied to fallen officer. Dog key to whistleblower files. Flash drive found in collar. If you're seeing this, they didn't win. He could feel it rising, like pressure behind glass. A waitress passed with a tray and paused, pointing at the screen. Is that real? Joel nodded once. It's real. The tray tilted slightly in her hands. Damn, she whispered. That dog? That was his? Joel looked down. His and someone else's? By midday, the city's phone lines were clogged. Reporters swarmed the steps of City Hall. Civilian complaints flooded the precinct's online portals, calls for justice, resignations, reinvestigations. And by 3 p.m., hashtags began trending. Number, Justice for Callahan. Number, Max New. Number, Whistle Dog. Number, Reopen. The 1-7. 17 names. 17 closed cases that shared one thing in common. They were connected, however loosely, to the task force Callahan had tried to dismantle. Files redacted. Witness silenced. Evidence misplaced. Now, under the weight of public outrage, Internal Affairs had no choice. They issued a statement. In light of newly surfaced material evidence, we are formally reopening all cases associated with Officer Callahan's investigative portfolio. Full cooperation with federal oversight will be provided. That night, Lena sat cross-legged on her living room floor again. But this time, Max, no longer Axel, lay beside her. The collar sat between them, no longer holding secrets. Lena ran her fingers through the thick fur behind his ears. They heard him, Max, she whispered. They finally heard him. He didn't bark, didn't move. Just let out a deep, slow breath and nudged her knee with his nose. There were things dogs remembered that words couldn't hold, and there were wounds that only truth could clean. Outside, across the country, people stood in silent vigils with candles and cardboard signs. Some held up photos of lost family members, victims whose cases had gone cold. Some lit candles for Mark Callahan, a name that now symbolized more than a fallen officer. He was the one who didn't look away, who trusted a dog more than a badge, and who gave his life so that someone else's might be restored. Back in the shadows, those who had once pulled strings made hurried calls. Shredders hummed in locked rooms. Files were relocated, but some damage couldn't be undone. The footage was everywhere now, shared, downloaded, archived on drives, and mirrored on thousands of cloud accounts. They couldn't silence the message anymore, because it had come in the form of something no one expected. A child's teddy bear, a dog's scar, a flash drive, hidden by love. By morning, Lena's case had become more than a custody battle. It had become a referendum on ownership, on silence, on what we choose to remember and what we're told to forget. Journalists camped outside the courtroom. Protesters painted chalk outlines of paw prints across courthouse steps. The public sentiment was no longer split. It was a landslide. The nation had seen a girl reclaim her dog, yes. But deeper than that, far deeper, was the collective gasp that followed the realization. They tried to erase him, tried to burn a body that never belonged to them, tried to train obedience into something born of love, and failed. Because you can teach a dog commands, but you cannot unteach loyalty. The house stood on the edge of a long-forgotten orchard, where wind moved through the bare branches like whispered memory. It was small white paint peeling in places, roof patched with care rather than budget. But it was quiet. It was theirs. Lena stepped onto the porch barefoot, mug in hand, still warm from tea steeped too long. Morning mist curled around the broken fence, and the only sound was the soft creak of the swing where Max, still called Axel by the city on paper, rested his head on the weathered wood. He didn't chase birds anymore, didn't bark at shadows. But something in him had changed since the courtroom. Not just in body, though, the limp in his rear leg had softened, but in spirit. It was like he knew he didn't have to prove anything anymore, that he'd finally made it home. The first night in the farmhouse. Lena couldn't sleep. Too quiet, too still. The silence held the weight of old things, unspoken grief, half-remembered lullabies, the shape of a voice now gone. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan blades, moving slow as thought. Then came the sound, a soft scrape against the floor, claws on worn pine, then a huff, followed by the groan of fur settling into carpet. She didn't have to look. She knew. He always slept close now, closer than before, as if some part of him feared this was all a dream. A moment later, she felt it, just the gentlest touch. One paw, heavy and sure, reaching up to rest against her blanket-covered leg. Reassuring. "I'm here." In the daylight, his steps were slower, but he still followed her through the house, room to room. No leash needed, no voice required. In the kitchen, he waited by the stove as she stirred oatmeal. In the garden, he sat under the fig tree, eyes closed, nose tilted to the wind. She placed the old teddy bear, his teddy bear, on the porch rocker. Faded yellow, a corner chewed from long ago. Still smelled faintly of smoke and dust and time. He walked up to it like approaching a memory, then, gently, nudged it with his snout, circled once, and lay beside it. That night, he took it with him. The farmhouse had no internet, no doorbell cameras, just the rustle of field grass and the scent of dirt after rain. Lena liked it that way. One afternoon, she pulled out the box. It was cardboard, taped, and water-stained. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were fragments of her father's life. A badge worn smooth at the edges. A photo of her as a toddler on his shoulders. The corner of a report he never got to file. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she placed the badge beside Max's water bowl. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, he sat. Not as a trick, not as muscle memory. As tribute. One evening near twilight, when the sun folded into the land like it was going to sleep too, she found him by the fireplace. The bear was tucked beneath his chin. His breathing was deep, steady. One ear flopped over, the other still alert. And his front paw, old with scars and calluses, rested lightly, deliberately on the stuffed animal's belly. She didn't speak, just sat beside him, cross-legged, watching the fire glow in his fur. "Do you remember?" she asked softly. "That first night, when you carried me down that tunnel and wouldn't let go?" He didn't move, but his tail twitched. "Once?" Sometimes healing doesn't come with trumpets. It doesn't shout. It comes in the form of shared silence, in the way two survivors breathe in rhythm, even when no words are said. Lena had spent years chasing proof that he was Max, that they were family, that the world had gotten it wrong. Now, in the dim warmth of a house, far from city noise, far from lawsuits and headlines, she realized she didn't need the world to agree anymore. She had a dog with one scar on his belly, one paw that trembled in sleep, and one impossible truth written into the way he leaned against her when storms came. And every night since the trial, without fail, he brought the bear to bed. A ritual, a tether, a memory made flesh. The scream tore through the stillness like a wound. Lena woke in the dark, breath catching in her throat, fingers clawing at the sheets. For a moment, the room wasn't hers. The walls weren't safe. She was 3 again. The air thick with smoke, the sirens not fast enough. Then something warm pressed against her ribs. A soft weight, a nose, cold and certain. Max Snow, Axel to the world, but not to her, stood beside the bed, eyes reflecting the pale blue nightlight. His ears were half raised, alert, but not afraid, just listening. He gave a low, breathy whine. Not quite a bark, not quite a question, just present. She exhaled, her voice still shaking. "I'm okay, just a bad one." The silence that followed was sacred. No reply. Just his body settling onto the rug, then the soft rustle of fabric as he dragged the teddy bear up beside him. She didn't remember when it had started him checking on her. Always within moments of the worst dreams, like he knew the pattern, even when she didn't. At her next therapy appointment, Dr. Mandel sat back in the worn leather chair and crossed one leg over the other. "He does this every time?" she asked gently. Lena nodded, arms folded over her chest. "Every single time. I don't even call out loud. I just jolt awake. And he's there." Dr. Mandel tilted her head. "You know, the body keeps score, but so does love." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Sometimes," the therapist continued, "love remembers better than memory ever could, especially with dogs like him. It's not about tricks or training. It's imprint, instinct." Lena looked out the window. The leaves had started to turn gold along the edges. She whispered, "He remembers me, doesn't he?" Dr. Mandel smiled, the kind that didn't rush to answer. "I think he never forgot." That evening, Lena opened the back door and let the wind move through the screen. She crouched near the edge of the porch, watching as Max lay in the grass, ears twitching toward the crickets. His back leg gave a soft kick, dreaming. "Hey," she said quietly. He opened one eye. "I've been thinking." The eye blinked, slow as dusk. "We can't undo what happened, but maybe we can help others who still carry what we've carried." She paused, heart racing slightly at the idea of forming. "What do you say we start over?" She held out her palm like she had when she was little. "New mission. Together." He didn't move for a beat. Then, with that familiar grunt of old bones and earned aches, Max stood, walked over, and pressed his forehead to her hand. The next week, they started basic therapy K9 training at a small volunteer center on the edge of town. No buzzers, no sirens, no crowds. Just a few kids with wheelchairs, a couple of veterans, and a quiet instructor named Jenny who never once asked for paperwork. Lena explained that Max had a past, that she didn't have the whole story, that he might not pass every standard test. Jenny just shrugged. "That's okay. Sometimes it's not the dog who needs the training. It's the people." They began slowly. Max already knew the cues: sit, down, stay. But this was different. Less about obedience, more about presence. He didn't flinch at wheelchairs, didn't growl when approached from behind. And when one young boy with a speech delay touched his ears and mumbled, "Safe dog," Max simply leaned into him and closed his eyes. "He's doing fine," Jenny whispered. But it wasn't until the third session, when an elderly woman with late-stage dementia started crying out for a son long gone, that Lena saw the magic. Max approached slowly, didn't bark, didn't command attention. He just lay beside her, rested his head near her knee, and waited. After a minute, her cries softened. She began stroking his fur, repeating softly, "Good boy, good boy." And back home, Lena filled in the application. Therapy K9 private volunteer status. She listed Max as German Shepherd, approx. 9 years, prior service, retired. In the handler notes, she wrote one sentence: "He was my protector before I could speak, and he still is." That night, she tucked into bed earlier than usual. A new kind of tired, not from grief, but from giving. She turned off the lamp. In the silence, the bed shifted slightly, just enough to know he was there. The weight of a paw touched her ankle. She smiled in the dark. "I'm okay now, Max," she whispered. But he didn't move. Because love, once awakened, does not sleep again. Not truly. And in the quiet dark of that little farmhouse, the night held no fear. Not anymore. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and soft sorrow. But when the German Shepherd entered the pediatric wing vest snug on his back, steps slow and even the mood shifted. Children who hadn't smiled in days suddenly leaned forward in their beds, eyes wide. Some whispered, some gasped. One little girl with a tracheostomy let out a breathy giggle, the first sound her nurse had heard from her all week. Axel, once trained to track and pin suspects in dark alleyways, now moved with gentleness only a creature who had seen too much could muster. He let small fingers press into his fur. He nudged tissues closer when kids cried. He stood still when a boy with trembling hands reached out, just to feel something warm. "He knows," a nurse whispered to Lena as they watched from the doorway. "He knows who needs him most." Lena only nodded, blinking back something that wasn't quite sadness anymore. Their next stop was a school for children who had seen more than they should. Foster kids, court-involved youth, students with bruises they couldn't name and wounds no adult report had captured. Axel didn't judge. He didn't speak. But when a teenager in detention quietly unzipped his hoodie, revealing the word "Mom" tattooed in shaky letters across his forearm, Axel padded over, rested his chin on the boy's knee, and just stayed. The boy froze. Then, slowly, his hand moved to the dog's neck. A pause. A deep breath. "You don't care what I did," he mumbled, almost to himself. "No," Lena said softly. "He never has." In time, the stories began to follow them. The dog who used to wear a badge now wore kid stickers on his vest: dinosaurs, hearts, and glitter stars. The war dog, who'd once been feared, now taught classrooms how to sit quietly and listen with both ears and heart. In one school hallway, a paper was taped to the bulletin board, a drawing by a third grader named Mateo. It showed a house, a girl with a teddy bear, and a big dog standing in front of her like a knight. The caption read, "Axel helps people who are scared. He helped her. Now he helps me." The sunsets at the farmhouse were different now, not just because of the colors, but because she stayed to watch them. Really watch. Some nights, she sat on the porch swing with her boots unlaced, her hair still smelling faintly of antiseptic and crayons. Axel lay beside her, breathing slow, the tips of his ears twitching at cicadas and wind. This evening, the clouds streaked amber and rose above the hills. A softness hung in the air, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, only gratitude. Lena reached over, her fingers brushing the fur between his ears. "We made it back, didn't we?" she whispered. Axel didn't move, but she felt it, the slow exhale, the warmth of his body against her leg, the quiet agreement that didn't need words. Not all returns are loud. Some happen inch by inch, breath by breath. And sometimes, the road home curves through fire, silence, courtrooms, and memory. But on this porch, in this hour, it was enough to just be still. Together. A week later, the mayor's office sent a letter. "Dear Miss Callahan," it read, "in light of Axel's distinguished history and the impact he continues to have on our community, we would be honored to award him the city's Medal of Civic Service, first ever given to a non-human recipient." Lena read it aloud while Axel stared at a squirrel through the window, entirely unimpressed by politics. She smiled, folded the letter neatly. "You've already got your medal," she said, resting her hand over his heart. The beat there was strong, steady. Human or not, he was family. And so, a quiet life began. One visit at a time, one child's smile at a time, one whispered truth between a girl and her dog under the falling sun. The morning sun climbed the city's skyline the way an organist draws a single sustained note, slow, deliberate, reverent. On the steps of the renovated War Memorial Plaza, rows of folding chairs faced a temporary dais draped in navy cloth. The flag overhead barely moved, held in place by a breeze too respectful to interrupt. Axel waited just behind the stage in a patch of half-shade, vest, freshly brushed, muzzle stippled silver where time had brushed its own paint. He sat with a veteran's composure, still, but not stiff, an old sentinel who had learned that dignity breathes easiest in quiet. Beside him, Lena smoothed the front of her cotton dress for the 5th time in as many minutes. The program booklet trembled in her hand no matter how tightly she pressed it to her chest. She inhaled once, the kind of breath her therapist called square breathing, and looked down at the dog that had once carried her entire world in the curve of his body. "You ready, partner?" she whispered. Axel's ear flicked. His tail swept once across the concrete like a brushstroke of silent yes. People began to gather, a mix of uniformed officers, city officials, hospital nurses, children from the pediatric wing who had written, "Thank you, Axel," on neon poster board. Camera crews set up in discreet angles. A local jazz trio tuned muted brass beneath the shade of a sycamore. On stage, Mayor Harlan adjusted the microphone. The mayor's suit was immaculate, but his eyes softened by age, and a scandal-scarred year held something humbler than politics. The city seal gleamed behind him, but even that felt secondary to the shepherd resting just out of frame. "When we planned this renovation," the mayor began, voice carrying over speakers, "we meant for this plaza to honor those who served with courage. We didn't realize it would also honor one who served on 4 legs." A quiet ripple of applause. He gestured toward the edge of the stage. "Axel, would you join us?" Lena rose with him, guiding gently, though she knew he didn't need the leash. His gait was measured slight hitch in the rear leg, the memory of an old line of duty injury, but each step carried the weight of something larger than pain. Belonging. They mounted the few wooden steps, audience rising to their feet as if by instinct. Sunlight caught the worn brass tag on his collar, Axel, retired hero. But Lena's thumb brushed the backside where the faint ghost of another name, Massachusetts X, still lived beneath polished metal. Mayor Harlan cleared his throat. "By unanimous resolution from the City Council, Chief of Police, and Canine Command, we today bestow upon Axel the Medal of Bravery and the Retired Hero Service Citation for extraordinary courage in the line of duty and for contributions that transcend the badge." Officer Brooks, Axel's former handler, stepped forward with a velvet box. His eyes were glassy, jaw tight. He knelt, opening the lid so only the dog could see. Then, with a steady hand, affixed the metal just below Axel's throat latch. The disc glinted at the center of years' worth of scars and stories. Brooks whispered something no mic caught, something that made Axel's ears tilt. Something like, "We did good," then stepped back, hands clasped behind him, shoulders easing for the first time in months. "Lena Callahan," the mayor said, turning to her. "Would you like to say a few words?" The booklet felt suddenly heavier. She glanced at the speech she'd written in 3 paragraphs, perfect punctuation, approved by multiple adults. Then she folded it in half, slipped it into her pocket, and gripped the microphone with both hands. Her voice, when it came, was small but carried. "Thank you for honoring him," she began. "But before Axel was a police hero, before any of you met him, he was something else." She paused. The plaza hushed. "He was my safe place, my home." The words trembled out, raw and unpolished, yet truer than any prepared line. "When the world got very loud, he never left. Even when we were apart, he kept looking for me, and I kept dreaming of him. Today, you call him hero, and he is. But to me, he's—" her fingers brushed his fur. "He's the reason I remember love instead of fear." A breeze tugged at her hair. She took one more breath. "So thank you for this medal. We'll keep it. But please remember, bravery doesn't always look like running toward danger. Sometimes it's staying when a child wakes up crying, or letting strangers hold your paw because their hearts hurt." She crouched. Axel turned, pressing his head gently into her shoulder. Applause rose, not explosive, but thunderous in its sincerity. Even the officers who once argued custody wiped at eyes they claimed were watering from the sun. After photos and formalities, crowds drifted toward food trucks and shaded picnic tables. Journalists packed gear. The jazz trio struck up "What a Wonderful World." Yet a quiet circle remained around the shepherd and the girl. A boy in hospital pajamas shyly approached with a crayon drawing. It showed Axel beside a bed sprinkled with stars. The caption spelled in uneven letters, "You make bad dreams go away." Axel sniffed the paper, gave a low grumble of approval, and the boy beamed. Nearby, Brooks rested an elbow on the railing beside Officer Rivas, who'd once handled Axel before the truth unraveled. "You seeing this?" Brooks asked, voice cracked with something he didn't try to hide. Rivas nodded. "Best retirement party I've ever worked." Later, as gold light stretched across the plaza, Lena and Axel walked to a quiet patch of grass overlooking the river. She unhooked his medal, tucked it into her satchel, then lay back, hands behind her head. He settled beside her, body curved to fit the length of her spine, the teddy bear wedged between his paws. The city hummed in the distance. But here, cicadas sang louder. "Do you think Dad can see us?" she whispered. Axel's tail brushed the grass once, slow and sure. She smiled. "Yeah, me too." In that hush between dusk and dark, the metal might have gleamed like a small sun in her bag, but its weight was already eclipsed by the steady thump of a shepherd's heartbeat, a rhythm that had guided her home, metal or no. And somewhere deep in memory, where smoke had once choked the stars, a voice seemed to answer, "They didn't win. You did." The brass band had long since fallen silent, but the crowd still lingered, caught in that hush that comes only after something sacred has unfolded. Folding chairs creaked as people rose in ones and twos, uncertain whether to leave or simply stay and breathe the moment in. High on the dais, the velvet metal box sat open, a small pool of sunlight glinting off the silver and blue ribbon. Most eyes had drifted to Axel, now lying sphinx-like at Lena's feet, tongue lolling, tail sweeping, slow arcs of contentment across the stage boards. He looked less like a decorated veteran than a farm dog who'd stumbled onto a Sunday picnic. Only one man hadn't moved. Officer Raymond Ray Calder stood rigid off to the side, hands clasped so tight the leather of his gloves creaked. The brim of his patrol cap shadowed eyes that had watched the entire ceremony with something harsher than skepticism guilt. 6 months ago, he'd laughed in the bullpen when whispers of a miracle mutt made rounds. He'd called it sentimental nonsense, said DNA could be faked, and kids remembered what they wanted to remember. He hadn't meant to be cruel, he told himself later. He'd meant to be practical. But practicality was hard to defend when a dog looked at a child the way Axel looked at Lena, as though nothing else on earth existed. The mayor's aide cleared her throat, breaking Ray's penance. "Officer Calder, it's time." Ray swallowed, feeling the burn of 60-odd stares as he stepped toward the center. His boots rang on the wooden riser too loud, too formal. He removed his cap, slipped the white gloves from rigid fingers, and knelt. Kneeling was never required in metal ceremonies. It left the officer vulnerable, off balance. Yet Ray felt compelled, felt the weight of all the nights he'd doubted, the jokes he'd cracked, the headlines he'd ignored. Lena watched him with curious, steady eyes. Axel simply shifted his weight and faced Ray, ears half tilted, the gentle pant of a dog who knows when the human heart is fragile. Ray opened the new ribbon clasp, this one, a narrower strip designed to clip onto Axel's everyday collar so he could carry it without ceremony. His hand shook. So he took a breath, the way rookies are taught before the first breach. In deep, out slow, steady. "Hey, big guy," he murmured. Axel's tail brushed the stage once, deliberate. He inched forward, no command given, none needed, and pressed his nose against Ray's knuckles. The touch was light, but Ray felt it all the way to his rib cage. The dog's eyes were dark amber pools, ringed with tired wisdom and something gentler still. Not accusation, not pride, just trust, pure and unadorned. Ray clipped the ribbon beneath the metal Lena had tucked away earlier. The clasp clicked home. Done. Simple as that. Yet his vision blurred. He blinked once, twice, and found his lashes damp. It frightened him. How swiftly emotion could overwhelm a man raised to keep it locked behind duty's steel gate. He bowed his head, forehead grazing Axel's, and let one unsteady breath tremble out. "I was wrong," he whispered, voice cracking like old paint. "You keep her safe, okay?" Axel nudged him in answer. A warm exhale against Ray's cheek absolution given in a single breath. Behind them, a cameraman lowered his lens. Tears streaked the viewfinder glass. Two reporters forgot their scripted closings. One slipped a tissue to the other, mascara smudging in sympathetic ruin. On the flagstone below, a row of veterans in dress greens removed their caps and stood at ease, heads bowed not to a flag nor a fallen comrade, but to a living testament of loyalty. Lena stepped forward, small hand reaching. Ray looked up, startled, as she offered him the folded ribbon Axel had worn for the photo op. "You can keep this," she said, voice soft but certain. For believing now, Ray took it like a man handed his firstborn. "Thank you," he managed. His badge number gleamed on his chest, and for the first time in years, it felt lighter. Lena knelt, gathering Axel's head into her arms. The dog leaned, melting into her the way rivers slip into valleys, already carved for them. She pressed her cheek to his fur. "We did it, Max." She breathed soft, private, but the boom mics caught it anyway. Even the badge cried. A ripple of hushed laughter passed through the onlookers, gentle, cleansing. The phrase would headline blogs and late-night monologues, "The day the badge wept." But in that moment, it was simply true. Ray stood, replacing his cap, wiping his eyes without disguise. The mayor approached, hand extended. Ray shook it, then stepped back into the line of officers, shoulders squared, jaw set but something inside him newly unguarded. Above, a lone cloud drifted across the sun, cooling the plaza in a sudden hush. For a breath, everything stilled. Flags, faces, the restless buzz of cameras. It felt like a benediction, a final full stop. Then the cloud moved on. Light returned, brighter for the shade that had preceded it. Axel, metal shining at his chest, turned a slow circle old soldier's habit and lay at Lena's feet. She sank to the stone beside him, her fingers laced through the coarse fur at his neck, not to hold him back or pull him close, but to anchor herself to the moment. The certainty that after fire and courtroom and headlines, after tears honest and otherwise, they had found their way to this patch of sunlight together. And in that gold-rimmed silence, the city's clamor faded into distant hum. Only one truth mattered. Sometimes a badge needs to break before a heart can open. Sometimes a kneeling officer is the highest salute. Sometimes bravery is quiet as a dog's sigh against a child's hand. Spring coaxed the city back to color. Cherry trees blushed along the memorial plaza. petals drifting like slow snow onto benches still warm from morning sun. Just beyond the refurbished fountain, where pigeons tested the water with timid feet, workers in khaki uniforms crouched over a fresh slab of river-gray granite. They moved with a reverence, usually reserved for military graves, smoothing grout lines with gloved fingers, checking the level 3 times, though it was already perfect. When they stepped away, the new stone caught the light. Max, Alabama so known as Axel he never forgot. No badge numbers, no dates of service. Just a name, split like a secret, revealed, and 7 words that held a lifetime. Lena stood a few paces back, palms tucked into her pockets. The breeze lifted her hair, brushing it across her cheeks where salt-dry streaks still lingered from the ceremony. Max, who would always be Max, first sat beside her, muzzle speckled with silver, head tilted as if reading his own epitaph. "You like it?" she asked. His tail thumped once against the grass. A soft answer. By noon, the first visitors arrived. A troop of grade schoolers clutching construction paper cards. Their teacher whispered instructions, quiet voices, gentle hands, but the children needed little reminding. They approached single file, setting offerings at the base of the stone. A squeaky tennis ball, a frayed rope toy, a drawing of Max wearing a crown. One boy, Freckles, front tooth missing, knelt so close, his knees gathered dew. "My dog ran away last year," he murmured, tracing the carved letters with a fingertip. "I hope he finds me like you found her. M." Max leaned forward, nose brushing the boy's wrist. The child's smile widened into something brave enough to hold hope again. The teacher dabbed at her eyes, pretending the wind was to blame. Word spread the way stories do when they're true enough to need no embellishment. By late afternoon, a retired Marine, cane in hand, placed a pair of unit patches from his final tour beside the stone. A paramedic left a small, folded bandana printed with blue paw prints. "For every patient he helped calm," she said, voice catching. A teenage girl in a varsity jacket laid down a frisbee scrawled with Sharpie hearts. Reporters came too, but mostly kept their distance, notebooks drooping as they watched toddlers toddle forward with plush puppies held out like sacred relics. Cameras snapped, yet for once the shutter clicks felt less intrusive than archival guardians of a legend being born in real time. Lena returned the next day and the next, each visit revealing new treasures. Tiny sneakers hung by their laces so he can keep walking with us. An envelope of dog biscuits labeled hero snacks. A laminated letter from a woman in hospice, thanking Max for visiting during her final chemo round. "You didn't cure me, but you cured one terrible afternoon." City workers installed a low wrought iron fence to shape the offerings into careful order. Still, the gifts multiplied, spilling outward like rings in water. Someone tucked LED tea lights along the perimeter. At dusk, they twinkled, a constellation at the shepherd's paws. The story leapt neighborhoods, then counties, then coasts. Hashtags trended. Number He Never Forgot. Number Legend of Max. Number Paw Print Promise. Cartoonists drafted Sunday funny tributes. Late-night hosts closed monologues with "Good night, hug the Max in your life." But no headline captured the hum of footsteps that paused each evening at the stone, the pilgrim hush of strangers who didn't know they'd needed a place to set down their gratitude until it existed. One dusky Saturday, Lena slipped through the iron gate after the crowd thinned. Max paced slowly, sniffing new scents, bubblegum eraser shavings, fresh chalk, the faint metallic tang of keys someone had left tied with a blue ribbon. She knelt, running a palm across the smooth top edge. "It's strange," she whispered. "I spent so long trying to bring you back. Now everyone else is borrowing you too." A memory surfaced her father's worn voice on the video. "If you're seeing this, they didn't win." She pressed her forefinger to the first line of the inscription. Max lowered himself beside her, shoulder touching her knee. He exhaled, one of those deep, content-size dogs save for when the world finally makes sense, and rested his paw on the marble's base. A perfect match. Stone and fur, permanence and pulse. Soon, tour buses added Max's monument to their downtown routes. Guides recited the tale. The stolen dog who carried evidence in his collar. The child who wouldn't forget. The badge that wept. Teenagers filmed TikToks showing the transformation from canine warrior to therapy legend. A sculptor petitioned the city to cast bronze paw prints down the walkway so children could walk his path. The The city council voted unanimously to fund it. During the groundbreaking ceremony, the mayor smiled wryly at Lena. "I think this dog's feet are going to be more famous than our skyline." Lena shrugged, grin bright. "That's okay. Skylines don't wag." In. Months later, when the cherries were heavy with fruit and the cicadas drummed the evenings open, Lena arrived one twilight to find an elderly couple kneeling by the stone. A leash dangled between them, but the space beside their ankles was heartbreakingly empty. Their voices floated above the breeze. "She passed last week. 16 years. Best girl. Wanted to say thanks." Lena crouched, hand on Max's ridge, and listened. When the couple rose, she hugged them both, complete strangers, because sometimes grief only knows one language. Max sat between them, letting tears darken his fur. His stillness, an invitation to let sadness finish its song. After they left, Lena placed a new toy, soft plush shaped like a star, among the offerings. "For their girl," she told Max. "Carry it with the rest." He nudged the star into the pile, then looked up at the sky, bleeding pink into navy. Crickets began their hymn. Somewhere downtown, church bells chimed the half hour. And in that melody of dusk, Lena realized the legend was no longer just about what Max had endured. It was about the space he now held for others, a monument made of paw prints, stitched from the quiet bravery of showing up when someone needed a gentle weight against their heart. She brushed her palm over the final line once more. He never forgot, and smiled. Neither would they. The first hint of autumn whispered through the maple canopy, crisp, wood smoke sweet, the kind of air that rustles childhood back into the blood. Lena drew it deep into her lungs as she adjusted the quilted jacket around her shoulders. Beside her, Max, still called Axel on the city's paperwork no one checked anymore, took measured steps along the leaf-padded trail, paws sinking into earth the color of rust and cider. His muzzle, once charcoal, was now frosted pure snow. The limp in his back leg had grown pronounced, but his eyes, amber, thoughtful, held the same steady light that had guided her out of nightmares and into purpose. They walked without hurry. Time, after all, had already done its hurrying. A squirrel darted across the path. Years ago, he would have twitched toward the motion, ready to chase just because movement meant life. Today, he merely flicked an ear and kept pace, breathing easy, content to let the world pass uncorrected. Lena ran a gloved hand over his withers. "Still got that shepherd swagger," she teased. His tail gave one slow wag, loose at the base, a gesture that felt more like "I'm here" than "I'm impressed." They reached the base of the hill, the one her father used to climb on weekends when shift work allowed. He'd called it Lookout Point, though it barely rose 30 feet above the tree line. To a 3-year-old, it had seemed a mountain. To a grown woman, it remained sacred acreage, a compass made of dirt and memory. "Ready, old man?" she asked. Max paused, angled his head into the breeze as if tasting distance. Then he stepped forward. She matched his stride, slow, deliberate, feeling the grade tug at his joints. Halfway up, she offered to pause, but he pressed on, shoulders rolling with determined grace. Not pride, resolve. At the crest, the forest spilled open into a clearing rimmed with goldenrod and late-blooming asters. Beyond, the valley unfolded patchwork orchards, a glinting ribbon of river, the faint smudge of town where steeples pricked the sky. The sun hovered low, painting copper along the horizon, a warmth neither of them expected in September. Here, her father had once spread a blanket, laid out peanut butter sandwiches, and pointed to clouds, naming shapes: sailboat, dragon, runaway balloon. Here, Max as a puppy had tumbled after grasshoppers, ears too big for balance, yipping at each new wonder. Now the blanket was memory, but the hill still felt like sanctuary. Max eased himself onto the grass with an old warrior's sigh. Lena knelt beside him, knees damp from dew. She removed a small tin from her backpack, peanut butter dog biscuits she baked every year on his gotcha day. He sniffed, tail thumping once before settling still. "Treat for duty well done," she said. He accepted it gingerly, gums careful around aging teeth. They sat in quiet. No need to fill the space. Quiet had been their first language. Birds traded evening gossip overhead. A distant tractor muttered in a neighboring orchard. Somewhere downslope, a brook chuckled against stones smoothed by seasons. After a while, Lena pulled from her pocket the brass tag he'd worn during the medal ceremony. The lettering had dulled, But the words remained. Axel, retired hero. He never forgot. She turned it over. On the back, scratched by her own childhood hand, lay a single faded name, Max. Her throat tightened. "You know," she began, voice barely above the rustle of grass. "People still visit your stone. They leave toys, letters, even medals from other canine second. Nobody cares which name they say. They just feel better for saying it." Max's eyes drifted to her face, soft with something beyond comprehension. Trust, so absolute, it rewrote the definition. Lena leaned in, kissed the white fur between his ears. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching on breath, "for finding me, for keeping Dad's promise, for remembering when all I could do was forget." A breeze curled across the clearing, lifting her hair and the loose fur at his scruff. Somewhere behind them, a single maple leaf let go, spiraling earthward a slow, graceful surrender. Max inhaled, exhaled a rhythm steady but shallower than before. He rested his chin on her boot. She felt the subtle tremor of fatigue, the gentle slipping of weight as muscles relaxed utterly against turf. His eyelids fluttered half-mast, then eased shut. She stroked his flank, tracing scars that told a story burned into city annals but more deeply into her own skin. The sun lowered, setting the valley ablaze, sky and hilltop gilded like childhood recollection. Shadows stretched long, converging at the center where girl and dog formed a single silhouette, inseparable, indivisible. "You can sleep," she murmured. "I'll remember now." He didn't stir, but his tail tapped once barely audible over pulse and wind. The first stars winked awake high above, timid lanterns in the pale wash of twilight. Lena stayed until the chill found her bones, until crickets took up the night's hymn. She listened to each inhale, each exhale, measuring them against the metronome of her own heart. When she finally rose, she flicked on her headlamp and waited for him to stand. He didn't. She knelt again, pressing her forehead to his. No answer but stillness, soft and complete. The valley listened too. Even the brook seemed to hush. Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled through them, because grief, she'd learned, is love's last task. She tucked the brass tag into his collar, fingers steady now. Then she whispered one final command she hadn't used since she was 3 years old. "Show me happy." And miracle of miracles, his lips pulled back the faintest inch, a ghost of the grin he'd given her atop this same hill years ago. She laughed and cried in the same breath. Clouds drifted, revealing a sliver of moon. Its pale light brushed over them, silvering fur, gilding tears. Lena sat beside him again, hand on his back until the stars blurred and the world settled. When at last she rose to leave, she looked over her shoulder at the silhouette against the sky dog, resting where Father once pointed out shapes, and she knew 2 things without question. First, that love never truly leaves. Second, that some promises are kept longer than a lifetime. She walked down the hill in the hush of evening, the path lit by moonlight and memory, ready to carry the remembering the rest of the way home. The thermometer on the kitchen window read 23 degrees. Frost had stippled every pane of glass with delicate white constellations. Lena stood barefoot on the worn floorboards, fingers wrapped around a mug she hadn't tasted. Dawn seeped through the curtains in weak ribbons, the kind of light that felt too thin to warm anything but memory. Max hadn't come to the back door for his usual pre-dawn patrol. No soft woof, no click of nails on pine. She told herself he was tired, old hips, stiff in the cold, yet unease threaded through her ribs. Setting the mug aside, she crossed the hallway toward the parlor where he liked to sleep near the wood stove's dying embers. The room was hushed. Fire, long gone to ash. In the corner, the plaid dog bed sat under a patchwork quilt. The teddy bear lay on its side, button eye-catching Dawn's first glint, and curled around it, nose tucked beneath frayed stuffing, was Max. He looked smaller somehow, as though sleep had folded him back into the pup she'd first met, ears too large, paws twitching toward dreams of endless fields. Only the silver frosting his muzzle betrayed the years. "Morning, sleepy," she whispered, voice a cloud in the cold air. He didn't stir. She knelt, sliding a hand beneath the quilt to his chest. Warm, but motionless still, in a way she'd never felt on him before. Her breath stalled. She pressed her palm flatter, seeking the familiar cadence. Thump, pause, thump. Nothing. A single tear blurred her vision, falling onto the soft fur between his shoulder blades. She moved closer, cradled his head, and for one impossible instant imagined he might sigh awake, annoyed at the intrusion, ready for breakfast. But the quiet remained unbroken. Outside, a lone crow called 3 sharp notes that echoed through the bare maple branches. She gathered him gently, lifting his weight into her lap. The quilt slipped, revealing the collar tag she'd polished every year on his birthday. With trembling fingers, she turned it over. Max. He never forgot. Her throat closed. "You kept your promise," she murmured. "Stayed till I could stand on my own." "Em?" She pressed her cheek to his forehead, felt the faint chill of fur already surrendering to morning air. Memories spilled forward unbidden. His first rescue lick on a scraped knee, the day he barreled through courtroom aisles just to reach her. The ache of his head on her thigh, after therapy visits, when they were both too full of other people's sorrows to speak. And the hilltop only weeks ago, where sunset painted them in copper and he'd given that last gentle grin. She'd thanked him then. But grief has no regard for adequacy. It always asks for one more moment, one more word. Lena brushed her thumb along the seam of the teddy bear threadbare, singed, mended countless times. She tucked it tighter under Max's chin, a final comfort. "Take him with you," she whispered. He was ours, a creak behind her floorboards bending. Her foster mother, now grayer around the temples, lingered at the doorway. No questions, no rush, only open arms that waited until Lena leaned back into them. Max still nestled close. They sat together on the cold planks while the pale sun climbed, wrapping grief and gratitude into one fragile hush. Outside, the icicles began to drip, each drop a tiny exclamation that dawn, relentless, goes on. Eventually, the world intruded phone calls to the vet, arrangements whispered, decisions made with the tender efficiency love demands. But for a sacred slice of morning, nothing existed except a girl, a bear, and a shepherd whose heart had beaten long enough to mend 2 others. When the local clinic sent a gentle van to the farmhouse, Lena carried Max to the porch herself. Frost cracked beneath her boots, breath ghosted the air. She paused at the threshold, turning so the light could catch his face one last time. The driver, eyes damp, opened the door and stepped back. Lena kissed between Max's eyes right where courage had lived for nearly a decade. "Run ahead," she breathed. "Dad's waiting." She laid him on the blanket they'd shared since the hilltop picnic, tucking the teddy bear against his chest. As the door slid shut, winter sunlight struck the metal hanging from the collar, a quiet flare that danced across the porch boards before fading. The van eased down the gravel drive, tires crunching in steady rhythm. She watched until it disappeared behind orchard rows bleached white with frost. Only then did she notice the silence was not empty. Birds chirped, wind chattered through brittle leaves, the world carrying on as worlds do. She folded her arms to her chest, half for warmth, half to hold the hollow space where heartbeat and fur had been. Tears blurred her view again, but they tasted less like despair than tribute. A memory drifted back her therapist's words. Sometimes love remembers better than memory. How true. Max had remembered her through smoke, sirens, courtrooms, and age. Now it was her turn to remember for them both. She turned toward the orchard, where bare branches arced overhead like cathedral arches. Somewhere beyond, Lookout Point waited under crisp blue sky. One day, she would climb it again, medal in pocket, to scatter soil and stories. But not today. Today, she would light the wood stove, lay out 2 mugs of tea, one for sipping, one for steam, and write his name in her journal's margin, right beside her father's. A family tree traced not in blood, but paw prints and promises. Inside, morning light pooled across the empty bed, illuminating a cluster of Max's shed fur glistening like spun silver. She let it be. Proof that even after final sleep, pieces of love always remain. The kettle whistled. The day asked to begin. She breathed deep, drying her eyes with the back of her hand. "Okay," she whispered to the quiet house. "I'll remember." And the quiet answered soft as fur, warm as loyalty, with a peace that felt very much like a shepherd's last gift. The building smelled like fresh paint and cedar shavings, the kind of scent that says, "Begin again." Sunlight poured through ceiling-high windows, landing on polished concrete floors warmed by radiant coils hidden beneath. 10 kennels lined the west wall, each separated by glass instead of bars. At one end stood a half-moon training arena tufted with turf. At the other, a quiet lounge of overstuffed chairs where stories could settle before they were spoken. On the front door, newly stenciled in slate blue letters, read, Homefront Canine, Healing Center Rescue Dogs. Restored Lives. Lena Callahan, now Dr. Callahan, DVM, CDBC, watched from the mezzanine as her team guided the first class of rescues into their runs. Shepherd mixes, Labradors, a freckled hound with ears like silk. Some paced, some cowered, all carried histories written in the way they flinched at sudden sound or lifted paws unsure where safety began. She recognized every chapter. She'd lived a version of it herself. She placed a palm on the mahogany railing. Under her fingertips lay a brass plate etched with a single line. Because he never forgot, we remember. Below the mezzanine, 2 volunteers coaxed a sandy retriever toward the lounge. A Marine corporal waited there, early 30s, shoulders squared by muscle memory, eyes hollowed by nights he hadn't yet escaped. He knelt, palms open, breath held. The dog paused, tail uncertainly brushing the floor. Then, as if guided by some quieter command, she stepped forward and pressed her head against his sternum. The corporal's shoulders trembled once, then eased. Lena exhaled, feeling the click of 2 broken pieces finding their thread. Her office occupied a small nook just off the training ring. The walls were soft sage. The air hummed with diffused lavender to quiet, anxious heartbeats, human and canine alike. On the far wall hung only one framed photograph. A grainy still, a black and tan shepherd medal dangling untouched, leaning into a young girl in a funeral dress. The moment reporters caught before tears blurred the lens. Beneath it, gilded script read, Sometimes, memory has 4 legs. Every morning, Lena touched the frame in passing an oath renewed. Today, she paused longer, tracing the caption. 20 years had thinned the sting, but never dulled the pulse beneath each word. A knock at her doorframe drew her back. It was Priya, the program coordinator, holding a clipboard and wearing the uncertain smile of first-day logistics. New arrival just came, she said. Found tied behind an abandoned warehouse. Won't let anyone near. Lena grabbed her field notebook. Let's go meet him. They found the dog in the isolation nook, a dark brindle shepherd mix crouched in a corner, lip twitching at every approach. His eyes were wild, but behind the frantic whites, Lena saw a glint she recognized, the edge between fight and hope. She knelt just outside the kennel, angled sideways so her gaze wasn't direct. Slowly, she placed a fleece square on the ground, left her palm resting atop it, and spoke in a voice threaded with calm. Hey, brave boy, no one's taking anything today. We're just remembering together. Minutes bled into silence. Then the dog's nostrils widened. He inched forward, sniffing the fleece, then her wrist. When his nose touched her sleeve, a single puff of breath escaped him, deflating the armor he'd dragged in from whatever night had shaped him. Priya whispered, How do you always know what to say? Lena's smile was small, wistful. Someone taught me once, most wounds close faster when we let them remember instead of forget. It was something her therapist had said in their final session. Max helped you move memory from scar to map. Now she passed the lesson forward, one heartbeat at a time. By mid-afternoon, the training arena hummed with gentle chaos. Clickers, kibble scents, volunteers guiding veterans through leash techniques. Lena moved between pairs, adjusting posture, reminding handlers to breathe through their feet, not just their chests. She watched as Staff Sergeant Alvarez, haunted by IED, Echoes practiced grounding cues with a lanky pointer mix. Each time the dog touched his knee on command, Alvarez's shoulders dropped a centimeter, the tremor in his hand easing. Between demonstrations, Lena's gaze drifted to the mezzanine railing, where a worn teddy bear now sat, one button eye, one missing, fur patched, and faded. She'd placed it there opening day, not as decoration, but as compass. Max's bear. Sometimes volunteers asked about it. She told them its story only if they really listened, if they understood that the heart stitched into that bear was the same one they were teaching dogs to carry into human dreams. Evening settled soft across the valley, sky violet behind the glass facade. The last veteran left with a pocket full of liver treats and the first flicker of belonging he'd felt in years. Volunteers sanitized kennels. Priya logged notes, yawning behind her tablet. Lena locked the front door and lingered in the lobby's hush. Shadows danced across the photo on the wall, girl and dog, locked forever in that impossible embrace. She pressed 2 fingers to her lips, then to the image. "Still working the job, partner," she whispered. "Plenty left to do." In the quiet that followed, she almost heard it, the soft thump of a tail against old pine floors, the breath of a shepherd sighing approval. She flicked off the lights, leaving only the hallway sconces aglow, and stepped into the night air. The stars were bright above the orchard, same as the night he'd first trotted back into her life. Scarred, but certain. Memory, she thought, slipping keys into her pocket, is not a ledger of what's lost. It's a lantern for the next soul on the trail. And tonight, lanterns lined every kennel in gentle snores and twitching paws, proof the story had not ended with a final sleep. It had simply changed narrators. She turned toward home, boots crunching gravel, and the wind carried a familiar echo, a silent vow in a language of paw prints. "I never forget." Lena smiled into the dark. "Neither will I." When we look back on Max's journey, what lingers isn't the medals or the headlines, it's the quiet power of a dog who refused to forget the child he loved. German Shepherds have a reputation for courage, but their greater gift is loyalty that sinks deep and stays gentle, even after the work is done. Stories like this remind us that every wag, every nudge, every patient breath beside a hospital bed carries real, healing weight. If you'd like to deepen the bond with the 4-legged friend in your own life, you might enjoy the Humane Society's free Canine Connection Guide, easy to find with a quick search whenever the time feels right. No pressure, just a thoughtful resource filled with simple games and calm heart training tips that celebrate exactly what makes dogs, especially wise old shepherds, such steadfast companions. Take good care. Give your pup an extra scratch behind the ears tonight. And remember, the stories we share with our animals never truly end. They simply grow quieter, sweeter, and more meaningful with each passing year.